Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto beats everyone in chunin exam. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Dane Namor and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Tsunade sighed. It was a beautiful day. The sun was bright, the birds were singing, the peace after the Shinobi Alliance war had all signs of continuing. She had a fresh jug of sake hidden from Shizune, there wasn't even much paperwork stacked up on her desk, at least not enough that she couldn't sneak away for a few hours and enjoy a drink in the warm midday sun. So, by all respects she should be in a good mood. Unfortunately, the one problem she'd been persistently putting off addressing was now staring her right in the face. Monba-chan. What the hell? She winced slightly at the volume and yelling at her, of course. The problem keeping her from a blissful afternoon of drinking. 1 year after the Shinobi Alliance war, the eternal genin, Naruto Uzumaki was standing in front of her demanding the answers she owed him. Part of her wanted to smack some sense into the brat and be done with it, unfortunately the guilt she had at delivering the bad news and for her own part in it stayed her hand. He'd been so happy when she'd called him in, too so happy to hear that Konoha was finally hosting the first chunin exam since the war. So happy right until she'd informed him that he wouldn't be participating. The exams themselves were enough of a headache. With the major villages spending so much time getting things back in order after the catastrophic losses from the war, it had taken this long to even get started, not to mention that with the new alliances in place all the major villages and most of the minor villages would be attending. Don't tell me you need me on another diplomatic mission or something. I just got back a few days ago. Naruto had been busy as well, she mused. He had somehow become a large factor in sustaining the current peace between the villages. Not only had he made quite the name for himself, leading the forces towards their final push for victory, but thanks to his uncanny knack for making fast friends with anyone he met, he'd somehow managed to forge friendships with almost all the major players from any given village. Beyond simply being famous throughout the elemental lands, everyone wanted to speak to Uzumaki Naruto now. Anytime new terms of agreements or trade deals were discussed, negotiations went much better when he was there escorting the diplomat. Apparently it was that much harder to try screw Konoha on terms with him standing there grinning. That stupid, we're all good people, we should be friends, let's hang out together. Smile of his around the room. Although, the fact that said smile also entailed, by the way, I know all the strongest ninja in your village and hold close ties with your leader, didn't hurt. It seemed these days everyone wanted Naruto as an ally, if for no other reason than everyone else considered him one. To be anything else could be very dangerous. She sighed again, tuning him out. He continued ranting, leaving her unable to get a word in edgewise. She took another moment to examine the man before her. It really was hard to believe the little brat had grown so big. He wasn't that Naruto anymore, now he was Naruto Uzumaki, the hero of Konoha, the Orange Flash, the prophesized savior. The man who, if her reports were to be believed, had apparently told the advisors of the Tsuchikage, hey, you guys should go easy on Suna. They're having a hard time right now, but they're all good people. You'd all get along well. Completely oblivious to more than 80 years of previous bad blood, ambushes, betrayals and war between those two villages. The fact that he'd then managed to both keep his head and report and mission successful 2 days ago fit right into his surprising profile. Deciding the less she thought about that the better, she shook herself from her thoughts. It was time to stop stalling. Naruto, she interrupted, it's nothing like that. You've got time off for the next few weeks. Actually, I'm pulling most of our important ninja back to the village during the exams, you included. It never hurt to stroke his ego a little, she smiled as he puffed himself up slightly. Years on, and the boy still treated praise as a rare luxury. It's simply a matter of logistics, she continued. Full teams of 3 are required to compete, and there aren't any eligible teams down a man. We don't have any spots for you. Just let me take it alone. I can handle it. He argued with his usual confidence, although not unwarranted in this circumstance, she admitted. I can use Kage Bunshin for anything that needs multiple people. I considered that as well, but ultimately a chunin is a leader of a team of ninja. He's a ninja who works with a team, taking the exam alone, ordering Bunshin around, none of that will show off the skills required to lead a team. Her heart ached looking at his disappointment right now. I know this is hard on you, I'm sorry Naruto, I really am. She hated moments like this. For someone who was meant to be the impartial leader of the village, she loved that damn brat far too much. Standing in the way of his progress like this pained her. He pouted and her guilt multiplied, watching the last of his exuberance drain away. Grappling with the knowledge that he was being left behind again. He opened his mouth to voice another question, but closed it without saying a word, suddenly looking as vulnerable as she'd ever seen him, clearly struggling to build up the courage to ask the question weighing on him. For a ninja who spent most of his life blurting out the first thing that came to mind, speaking from the heart more than the head, it was a very rare look any other time, and she would have found it funny. Right now she could barely stand it. He tried again, his voice barely a whisper this time. I just don't get why I'm still a genin, you know, why everyone else got promoted after the war. He trailed off, not quite asking the question he'd struggled with every time he'd seen her for the last 6 months. She sighed, there it was at last, the elephant in the room, the reason she'd been making an effort to go easy on him lately, the fact that he'd had to watch everyone else be promoted while he was passed over once again. Something he would have never expected from her. Quite frankly, she found the idea that Naruto, an S-class ninja and unquestionable village asset, was considered a genin ridiculous. Especially considering his vast, if insubordinate, contribution in the last war. Without question, his presence had far outweighed that of any of his peers. Yet in the following months she'd promoted most of the ninja in his year group to either special or full jonin, while he, the only genin on the front lines, had been ignored. It was nonsense, he knew it, she knew it, and the fact that he'd taken until now to question her about it honestly surprised her. Tsunade wondered whether that from was his trust in her, knowing that she'd never seek to screw him over, or if he was simply hurt that he'd been ignored yet again. Thinking for a moment, she decided it was probably best not to know. I understand your frustrations with this, Naruto, I do. To be honest, there are a few reasons we haven't moved you up. His eyes were boring into her now, she could see the hope in them, the hope that there was an explanation for this. Quite simply, the most important reason is that you're too valuable to the village for us to give you a standard rank increase. He looked confused, so she explained, think about it, you know how the chunin exams work, the reasoning behind them, drawing in the best clients and the best missions. If we just hand you a promotion, then it's done with. On the other hand, if you're able to compete in front of an audience, well, Konoha as a whole looks much stronger. Everyone will be able to see your strength. She was playing it up slightly. He was already incredibly famous, even if only among ninja, but pandering his ego couldn't hurt. The fact he was rubbing his head and trying not to grin instead of glaring at her was a good sign. Most ninjas saw your strength in the last war, there's already stories and legends being made about you. However, for the civilian world, they can't truly understand how much stronger you are from that alone. A civilian hears S-class and just thinks of very strong ninja. Doing this lets them see your strength is incomparable, so we put you on a stage, you crush anyone that comes at you, pass easily, and the village prospers. Her words had an immediate effect. Even with the acknowledgement he got now, he still was terribly weak to having his ego pandered to. So you're saying I'm too important for a field promotion then? That idea seemed to appease him at least. She decided to drop another hook. Exactly. Not to mention how much it'll add to your credibility as a Hokage candidate. The effect of that bait was immediate and obvious. Tsunade smiled, this was going far better than she dared hope for, she was feeling less guilty already. She mentally kicked herself, they should have had this discussion months ago. Really, she thought, she should have known he'd take it well enough, this was Naruto she was dealing with. The brat was practically incapable of bearing anyone ill will. If she played it right, maybe she'd still be able to sneak out and enjoy some sunshine before Shizune came to see her. I'm actually surprised you'd even want a field promotion. I would have thought you'd prefer it this way. You're not the kind of person who wants things gifted to you. I'd expected you to want to grasp this with your own hands. She tactfully ignored the fact that by now a chunin qualification was well below him, that he'd earned it in the field and thus grasped it with his own hands, many times over by now. Anyway, it's not like we treat you like a genin. You haven't done a mission below B rank in months. How many other genin do you see me giving S rank missions to? Hell, how many other chunin do you see? You get more S and A rank missions than most jonin. She softened for a moment. No one doubts you, brat, all a promotion would do is give you more responsibility. I would have thought me training you to be Hokage was enough for you. Do you want to start taking in genin or something? He was all smiles now. No, well you know Bachan. I was just curious. I didn't blame you or anything. He wasn't quite meeting her eyes when he said that. She noticed sadly, I just thought, you know, maybe it was because with the Kyabei and anyway. So I'm too important to be promoted outside the exams. That's fine. I'll just take them and kick everyone's ass. Yeah. She winced, so much for wrapping this up and getting a drink, now they were back at square one. He was mostly mollified, but she really didn't want to go through the whole song and dance with him again. She cut right to the chase. Exactly. Just not these chunin exams unfortunately, but as soon as we have a team with a spot we'll put you straight in. Sure thing. Yeah. And hey, I mean, if something happens or I find a team that'd be fine, right? This time it was her turn to glare at him. Naruto. If a spot opens or you're able to form a team, then that's fine, but I do not want to hear about you going around badgering teams to get someone to drop out so you can take a spot. He balked. She decided that probably wasn't his style regardless and relented slightly. Well, neither Kakashi nor Yamato have any missions right now, so yes Naruto, if you can find 2 other genin squad mates, then either of them can be your jonin sensei and I'd be happy to have you compete. That would probably be fine, she thought, and hey, it was Naruto, the brat who made miracles happen. Maybe she would be seeing him in the exams after all. She was fairly sure all the eligible genin were accounted for, but she'd worry about that later. For now, she'd finally had the conversation she'd been dreading, that deserved a celebration. Good, so get out of here. I've got important business to take care of before Shizune gets here. She was already pulling her drawer open. He didn't believe her for a second, but he did leave, so she pretended not to hear him laughing at her or calling her an old drunk. Unfortunately, when he was just down the hall, she couldn't pretend not to hear him cry out, "Ah. Hey. Shizune ni-chan." Tsunade froze, hand already clenched around the neck of the bottle. Damn. So close. She felt like crying, it could have become such a perfect afternoon. Hey, I've been having some trouble with my arm since the last mission, could you come take a look at it for me? Grinning as she heard Shizune's confused cries of what now? Huh? Naruto-kun. As she was dragged away, Tsunade remembered why she loved that damn brat. A few hours later, after receiving a thorough examination from a confused Shizune, Naruto found himself aimlessly wandering around the village. He was still in a bit of a funk from hearing he wouldn't be able to compete in the upcoming exams, and beyond that didn't really have anything to do. It was a little past midday though, so the best course of action, he decided, would be to grab something to eat and then figure out a plan for the afternoon. Unfortunately, even choosing lunch wasn't as easy as it used to be. I really feel like ramen, but Sakura-chan'll be mad if she hears I was at Ichiraku's 3 meals in a row after she made me promise to cut down maybe some donburi. Or, hey, is that? Boy. Hinata-chan. He called out, dashing over to her. Hinata wasn't necessarily the best lunch company since she didn't talk much and tended to spend most of the meal going bright red. Still, she was a nice girl, he hadn't regretted making an effort to get to know her after the war for even a moment, plus she was a good listener, perfect for venting his frustrations about those damn exams. Hey. What are you up to? You free? I'm getting some lunch, come with. Instantly breaking out into the most unflattering blush and stiffening ramrod straight, Hinata bravely fought down the urge to hide behind the nearest telephone pole. Then Naruto-kun. Wincing slightly at that damn stutter, she pressed on, sure, I'm not doing anything important, I'd love to. Truthfully, she'd eaten about a half hour ago, and her father was probably expecting her back soon. That was fine though, she'd just get something small. Lunch with Naruto. Her whole body warmed at the prospect. Hinata was actually very happy with her life recently. Things had settled down after the war, which had given her and Naruto time to talk without any daunting threats over their heads. While she knew they weren't necessarily dating, strictly speaking, per se they did spend a lot of time together whenever they were free. He had wanted to get to know her better and she was getting much less shy around him. She barely even stuttered anymore. The only downside she could think of was with him being so busy these days, always heading off for weeks at a time on one diplomatic mission or another, the times they got to spend together were few and far between. Still, even that wasn't so bad, that was just because people had finally realized what she'd always known about him. Anyway, she knew the chunin exams were coming up, things would slow down after that. Her body warmed again at that thought. Naruto must have leave coming up afterwards and she'd been putting off taking leave of her own. Hopefully she'd be able to take hers at the same time. A few weeks or maybe even a month to just relax in the village with Naruto. No missions, no S-class threats, no war, just her and him. Hinata was very proud of herself for not blushing as her thoughts trailed off for a moment there, she truly had grown. And so, just like she'd promised, Hinata walked side by side with a man she loved, making small talk while they ended up deciding on okonomiyaki. No way. You're gonna be proctoring the exams? For someone in the process of shoveling as much okonomiyaki in his mouth as possible, Naruto was surprisingly coherent. He knew it probably wasn't the most polite way to eat, Sakura-chan would get mad at him, but Hinata-chan never complained and she always seemed happy whenever she ate with him, so he enjoyed getting away with it. Well, I don't know if I'll actually get to. I'd like to. Hanabi-chan's going to be entering, it'll be her first time, I want to look out for her. He whistled, wow, so many Hina's gonna be a chunin. That's hard to believe, she's so tiny. She doesn't like it when you call her that, Naruto-kun, Hinata huffed, defending her sister. He just laughed and shoveled more food down. Hinata scolding him. Who would have thought? But yes, she's going to be attempting it. Well, she's a nice girl anyway, I like her. And if she's anywhere near as strong as you were at that age, she'll pass first time for sure. His finger and chopsticks were raised to the ceiling to emphasize that last point. I'll have to watch her matches with you, let's cheer her together. Showing just how much she'd improved, Hinata spent less than 10 seconds going bright red at the thought of sitting beside Naruto in the stands watching the matches that would definitely, probably, most likely, count as a date. That didn't stop her from noticing the slight flaw in his plan, though. But, oh no, won't you be participating in those matches, Naruto-kun? Hinata thought it was completely silly that Naruto was still considered a genin, especially after the war. Surely he would be competing this time to finally be advanced. When she saw his face instantly darken, she immediately regretted the question. Well, it wasn't unusual to see Naruto sulk about something. To see a smile fall off his face that quickly, it was obviously a very sore subject. Yeah. I should be, it's stupid. He twirled his chopstick searching for words. Apparently there's no genin teams with a spot open and they won't let me enter by myself. He stabbed his chopsticks into the remainder of the food and twisted them around. Gonna be a genin for another 6 months at least, he said with a resigned sigh. Bachan had made good points, mostly about him being too awesome to get freebuy titles, but still, it was hard to accept. Oh, now it was Hinata's turn to be depressed. She hated seeing him like this, especially since she knew he didn't deserve it. If she didn't know how close Naruto and the Hokage were, or that he was being groomed as her successor, she would have been furious at the lady. It had been awful after the war, when everyone had received notification of their promotions. She'd rushed to congratulate him, happily told him about her becoming a special jonin, and then heard he was still a genin. He'd taken it much better than most people would. At the end of the day, Naruto would always honestly be happy for anyone's achievements, but still, she knew it had hurt him. She couldn't imagine how hard it would be now for him to just sit and watch the exams. I'm sorry, that must be, that's terrible. Their previous good mood gone, Hinata floundered around desperately for a new topic. Now was probably not the best time to mention how she'd been hoping to team with him for the next jonin exams after he became a chunin. With Shino being made jonin, her team had a free spot. Naruto for his part put just his head on the table and groaned. Yeah. It sucks, I can't believe it. The full implications were sinking in now, even mini Hina's gonna be chunin before me. Shit. It was bad enough, he thought, when it was just everyone his age being chunin and him left behind, even worse with them all jonin now, and him still genin, thinking of the kids below him, now outranking him. No, wait, he definitely didn't want to think about that, he couldn't take it at the moment. Still, he felt bad lying there sulking in front of Hinata. Looking up for a moment, he could see she was clearly distressed. Ah, sorry Hinata-chan, he forced a smile. I only found out a few hours ago, guess I'm still kinda wound up about it. Another sigh. He didn't want to sit around moping, that wasn't his style, but there didn't seem to be anything else he could do at this stage. Not wanting to vent more at his friend, and with no other outlet for his frustrations, Naruto's depression quickly turned into a more familiar desire for action. Decision made, he stood up. I'm gonna go train for a bit, let off some steam or something. He fished out Gama-chan and slapped down a handful of builds. Good seeing you again. Thanks for lunch. Ah, bye Naruto-kun. He was already gone. She hadn't thought of anything to talk about, and he'd left her good mood evaporating quickly. She attempted to cheer herself up. Naruto wasn't the type to get depressed over something like this, he'd be okay soon enough. It was a shame their lunch hadn't gone quite as well as she'd hoped, but she'd been having a great time right until she'd asked that damn question. Stupid, she whispered to herself, hanging her head. Was that another chance blown? A few minutes later, after picking at the remains of her food, she stood to go and suddenly saw how much money Naruto had put down. Oh, he paid for my lunch too. And suddenly the warm feeling she'd missed was back at full strength. That means it's a date, right? A guy paying for a girl's meal, that's definitely a date. A date with Naruto-kun. Feeling slightly lightheaded and fully aware that all her blood had gone to her head, Hinata left the restaurant in a happy daze. Truly, it's the little things that count. It was an uncharacteristically subdued Naruto that was heading to the training grounds. Typically he had no problem celebrating the achievements of others. He was honestly happy whenever someone took a step closer to their dreams. He wanted to be the kind of Hokage that lead a village where anyone could achieve their dream. He even liked mini Hina. She was a nice girl, she laughed at his jokes, she was polite, and she seemed to have an easier time talking to him than Hinata did. To be fair, part of him noted, Hinata was a lot better at talking to him nowadays. Still. Damn it. Still, thinking of her in a chunin jacket, he'd be happy for her of course, but still. God damn that old hag. Erg, this sucks. He wanted to scream. He couldn't get the thought out of his mind now. Running his hands through his hair in frustration, he continued on. Hey. It's boss. So caught up in his thoughts he didn't even hear the shout. Yeah, training is definitely the right idea. I need to blow off some steam. I can try out that new Rasengan I've been thinking of, blow up some rocks. Thoughts of destruction easing his mind slightly, he finally noticed yells coming behind him. Hey. Oi. Boss. Don't ignore me, damn it. Bastard. Turning, he found himself instinctively dodging a jumping kick from his sometime student, said student's teammates trailing after. Oh, hey, sorry Konohamaru. Didn't see you guys there, what you up to? Finishing a mission. Konohamaru, like Naruto, typically had sunny disposition and far too much energy. Today however, he was practically glowing with excitement. Something big was definitely up. Nope. We just got back from seeing Ebisu-sensei. We're finally entering the chunin exams. It's gonna be great, boss. Suddenly pointing a finger directly at Naruto, he proudly challenged, "This is it. Me and you as rivals for Chunin. This is the start of our fight for the title of Hokage, don't think I'm gonna lose to you." And just like that, Naruto's day managed to get even worse. He'd been so wrapped up in thinking of Hinata's sister as a Chunin, he'd completely forgotten the other younger team that would have been eagerly awaiting the exams. Konohamaru would be aiming for Chunin. Konohamaru would be a Chunin before him. He quickly cut that image off before it could form. He most definitely didn't want to let that train of thought go any further in his current mood. I'm not going to be entering, he admitted, the words tasting like ashes in his mouth. There aren't any teams with a spot I can join. A dark part of his mind considered asking for one of Konohamaru's team to give him a spot, but he quickly squished it. Besides the fact Bachan had specifically told him not to do that, he didn't want to be the kind of person who'd sacrifice someone's progression for his own. Konohamaru was a good person, a strong ninja, a dedicated leader, an all-around pretty upstanding boy. Unfortunately, a part of him that he refused to acknowledge had for weeks been dreading facing Naruto in the exams. Having drawn the obvious conclusion that Naruto would crush him, there simply was no denying the strength difference. Most of Konohamaru thought of Naruto like a big brother and was sympathetic towards his obvious frustrations with being held back from promotion once again. If there was no personal stake, he would have been angry on Naruto's behalf. Unfortunately, for the part that feared facing his boss, the news was a very welcome relief. "Oh wow. You're not gonna be entering." He cheered aloud. "Woo. We're gonna pass easy then, I'm way stronger than you were when you first entered." Part of Naruto's mind regarded that as rather unfair. Sure, Konohamaru was more powerful than he had been if you discounted Kurama. However, Kurama and the villagers' corresponding treatment of him was a significant factor in why Naruto wasn't as strong as he could have been heading into the exams. However, most of his mind simply reacted with anger and hurt pride. "Hey. What are you saying, brat? Who taught you your best techniques?" And Konohamaru, being in many ways similar to Naruto, reacted the same. "So what? Where I learned them doesn't matter, I'm going to surpass you." At this point, Yuden and Mogi, who'd been wisely trying to stay out of this exchange, decided to back up. This was not good, this was going to escalate. Naruto and Konohamaru's personalities were too similar, their emotions would feed off each other and get out of control. "I'm going to be Chunin for sure, then I'll be ranked above you. I'll be the boss. No way. No way. No way can a brat like you make Chunin ahead of me." Konohamaru realized he'd struck a weak point and proceeded to start strutting around, rubbing it, "And I will. And then I'll be your squad leader on missions. I'll give you whatever order I feel like." He grinned evilly, already envisioning possible ways to abuse his power. Blah. Naruto was obviously able to envision the same things. "Oh. And then I'll take the Jonin exams and you'll still be a genin," he smirked, going for the kill. "Don't worry, I'll take you on as your Jonin sensei. Hey, you can start calling me Konohamaru sensei already." Blah. "You goddamn brat." Unable to even formulate a real reply, all he could think about was having to answer to Konohamaru, being bossed around or answering to him for missions. Naruto had worked hard for the respect he'd gained. The images dancing through his head hit his pride hard. Being passed over, being screwed around with, and now having it rubbed into his face, this was too much. This was way too much. He was quickly losing control of himself, his fists clenched so tight his palms were on the verge of bleeding. It would take a lot before Naruto would ever strike a comrade, however he was getting dangerously close to that point. "Naruto. Let's go." Luckily that was when Kurama weighed in, breaking Naruto off before he did something he'd regret. "This isn't worth it." Getting control of himself again, Naruto stepped back, unclenching his hands, he let out a deep breath and turned away from Konohamaru. Sure, the kid was an annoying brat at times, but he was also a good friend, he'd feel terrible if he took this any farther. Yeah. Thanks for the millionth time he thanked the fact he'd been able to make peace with Kurama. For someone who treasured bonds as much as Naruto, having a best friend built right into your soul was very welcome. Plus the bastard fox did a pretty good job of keeping him in check at times like this. Still, he was far more frustrated now than after talking to Hinata. He knew the best plan was definitely to head to the training fields as soon as possible. He'd go wear himself out destroying things until he felt better, or at least was too tired to care. Avoiding looking at Konohamaru, he moved past him and started to walk away, managing to let go of his hurt pride enough to wish them farewell. "Why, good luck with the exams, you kids. I'll be cheering you on, so don't take it lightly." While utterly failing at keeping the bitterness out of his tone, the sincerity in his words was clearly there. He disappeared over the nearest roof with a quick leap, leaving Konohamaru looking slightly abashed, avoiding Mogi and Yuden's eyes as they glared at him. An hour later, Naruto was still tearing into a cliffside on one of the far training grounds, sweat pouring down his face as he created new forms of Rasengan on the fly, slamming them into the rocks. He was currently experimenting with creating a planetary Rasengan without using the Nine Tails chakra, mostly because it would require so much concentration he couldn't focus on anything, but unfortunately he was failing completely. Feeling it fall apart as he charged, he quickly transitioned the remaining chakra into a standard Rasengan. Dashing forward, he slammed it into the rock, drilling a massive crater. All he could think of was Hanabi and Konohamaru parading in front of him, chunin vests on, being slapped on the back by all their friends, while he stood back, the eternal genin. An S-rank ninja stuck at the beginning rank. What a fucking joke. He growled, losing control of his emotions. Instinctively creating a pair of cage bunshin, he dashed forward again, this time succeeding at crashing a partially stabilized planetary Rasengan into the wall, blowing the crater far deeper. Barely a fraction of the damage he'd get in Nine Tails mode, but he wasn't trying to bring down the cliff. I know I'd have no problems if I could just enter the exams, but I don't know any other genin teams. Leaving the rocks alone for the moment, he leapt back, this time creating 4 new clones and stabilizing a Rasengan for almost 15 seconds. The resulting blast when he did lose control, knocking him back and far across the clearing. Ow. 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 Erg, he winced, skimming along the ground. Yeah, I might have to leave that for Nine Tails mode. Could work well with an Uzumaki Renden, though he filed that away for future practice. His stamina finally depleted and at least some of his frustrations worked out, Naruto was content to just lie on the ground for a moment, feeling his wounds heal. His thoughts inevitably drifting back to the all too familiar topic. This'd be easier if I knew more genin, but everyone has already been promoted already. There's no one left like M. Wait. Inspiration struck him like a thunderbolt, causing him to sit straight upright. Instantly his mind, so wasted on bookwork but so good at schemes, tactics or pranks, started working overdrive. He thought hard, remembering a half-forgotten conversation, spotting a discrepancy, putting together a theory. He was off the ground now, pacing around as a plan started to come together, a grin slowly forming on his face, growing bigger by the second. No way it could work though, oh man, Bachan would hate me though. That thought made his grin impossibly wide. HRMPH. You certainly never cease to come up with something unexpected. Ooh, oh yeah. I'm gonna enter the chunin exams. And with that, all his worries, his frustrations were washed away. Energy was coursing through him, his excitement unbound. He had a plan. An audacious, ridiculous and probably illogical plan, but Uzumaki Naruto had a plan and, as many great ninja had discovered to their peril, that was a very scary thing. Despite the excitement raging within him, a half hour later Naruto was sitting calmly at the edge of Konoha territory, becoming completely still and focusing on letting the natural energy flow through him. For anyone who knew him when he was young, it may have seemed bizarre for such a hyperactive ninja to have managed to master sage techniques at a level beyond even Jiraiya, the famed Toad Sage. Whether it was natural skill or part of his lineage from his mother's side, he never bothered to question. All he knew was that, even as excited as he was, he still gained a great sense of peace and wonder at switching to sage mode. Feeling yourself become one with nature, feeling the chakra of all the living beings around you, drawing the energy of the natural world into yourself, and feeling it strengthen your own. Sage meditation always filled him with deep contentment. He spent a half hour just meditating, collecting his thoughts and enjoying the peace he'd gained. Probably more than he needed, but he would want plenty of natural energy for the task ahead. Shifting out of the meditation, his standard personality took over once more. Alright. Let's do this. He yelled, opening his biggest chakra reservoir. Shifting into his perfect Nine Tails chakra form, his eyes gained a vertical fox-like slit through the horizontal bar of sage mode, and chakra burst forth from him like a supernova, the entire village suddenly aware that something must be going on. Anyone even remotely chakra-sensitive practically bathing in the warm positive energy, led off from Naruto's conversion of Nine Tails' malevolent chakra into his own. Pumping as much chakra as possible into it, he quickly formed 3 cage bunshin, each mimicking his form, sage and nine-tailed modes combined. They stood in a semicircle around him, each wearing wide grins and radiating enough chakra to level a mountain range twice over. He appraised his clones briefly. Okay, that should be more than enough. Go for it. Pointing off into the distance as he finished. You got it, boss. The first clone leaped away to the west at full speed, leaving little more than an orange flash as it zoomed into the distance. Damn straight. The second clone's voice trailed off as it quickly vanished into the east. Let's get wild. The final clone barely more than a blur, heading north by the time the words left its mouth. Conversely, the real Naruto withdrew his energy, released sage mode, and calmly walked back the way he'd come. It was of course against various regulations and rules to leave the village for any reason without explicit permission. To do so was to risk becoming a missing nin. Luckily he hadn't actually left the village, a cage bunshin ultimately was not him. So, off he went, hands behind his head and a large smirk on his face, as if he was about to pull off the greatest prank of his life. After that, life continued like normal. If anyone was paying attention, the only clue that something may be up was that he never seemed to create any cage bunshin. Well, normal for anyone else, it was an odd sign for someone like Naruto, who'd practically made that his calling card. However, since he didn't have any missions, it was hardly cause for concern. The only one who even seemed to notice was the ever-watchful Kakashi. The first real sign that there might be something going on happened a week later at Ichiraku's. Naruto was happily eating his third bowl, while his pink-haired teammate blushed at his praise after excitedly telling him about her latest achievement in the hospital. "Wow, Sakura-chan. That's amazing. You totally saved that guy's lyric." Slumping over, it suddenly seemed as if a great force had just slammed into him. All his energy was knocked out and for a moment he was almost deathly pale. Eyes glazed over, he toppled backwards. Humming to a few seconds later, he shook his head and tried to get his bearings. Looking around, he realized he'd fallen off the stool and that Sakura was looking over him, clearly terrified at his sudden collapse, desperately running diagnostic chakra into him. "Naruto. Naruto. Are you okay? What happened? What can I do?" Feeling his strength slowly come back, he waved the chakra off and let her help him back up, taking a second to spare a mournful glance at the now spilled ramen. Hehe, he scratched the back of his head, not wanting to tell her the whole truth just yet, but feeling guilty about worrying her like that. "I'm fine, Sakura-chan. Just got a report back from a little project I'm working on." Her worries faded slightly as he took his seat again and ordered a replacement ramen. He seemed to be moving alright at least, and she couldn't feel anything wrong with him from her cursory examination. Someone like Naruto suddenly keeling over was extremely odd, but he didn't seem concerned in the least. Not with that giant grin he was clearly trying to hide. She was worried for her friend's health, but decided to let him play it off for now. Naruto's thoughts of course weren't conflicted at all. "Oh yeah. One down. One down. This is gonna be so great." It took considerable willpower on his behalf not to start dancing. A similar scene replayed itself 2 days later while he was training new Taijutsu forms with Kakashi. Leaping back to avoid a snap kick, suddenly his guard was non-existent and he was stumbling forward in a daze, receiving a vicious cross for his efforts. Shaking his head as the dizziness passed, he found Kakashi looking down at him with an odd look. Having worked on the Rasen Shuriken with Naruto, it was pretty simple to deduce what had happened to knock the sails out of the typically energetic blonde. The question from there of course was why it had happened, although, judging from the devious smirk that Naruto seemed unable to bring under control, he wasn't sure he wanted to know still. You don't become a jonin without being at least somewhat curious. "You're planning something, aren't you?" "Something big." It was less a question than a statement. "Ah, you know me too well, Kakashi-sensei, it should be really surprising." Yeah, Kakashi decided he definitely didn't want to know. Just because he was probably paid enough to deal with it didn't mean he'd want to. Better to just stay out of whatever Naruto was planning than risk getting caught up in it. "Well, I'll leave it at that then." Pulling out his book, Kakashi hopped away, deciding it best to avoid Naruto until the other shoe dropped. His departure left Naruto lying there basking in the wonder of a plan that was all coming together. "So far, so good, brat. I've got to admit, your plan is working out a lot smoother than even I expected. It's cause I'm a genius. No one else would think of something like this." Well, that last part is certainly true. TCH. He had backup plans of course, other options in case things didn't work out quite as well, but still, he really had hoped and it looked like he wouldn't be disappointed. Now he just had to wait for the final piece of news. As it turned out, he didn't have to wait long, the final clone dispelling itself a few hours later. Unfortunately, his timing continued to be poor, being in the middle of drinking with Shikamaru, Choji and Kiba at the time. The effects of the final clone's dispersal the most disorienting thus far. Hahaha. Damn Naruto. You lightweight. Didn't you say alcohol didn't affect you? He's not passed out, is he? TCH, troublesome. Naruto, how many fingers am I holding up? Humming to on the floor of the bar, he saw his 3 friends looking over him, Choji worried, Shikamaru smirking and Kiba howling with laughter. That almost managed to wipe the massive grin off his face. Almost. Pushing Chaja's offered hand aside, he shakily made it back onto the bar stool, picked up his glass, slammed the rest of his beer back and turned to his friends. Time to spread the news. Yeah, laugh it up boys. More importantly, he paused for dramatic effect, hooking a thumb towards himself and fixing them with a triumphant glance. I'm entering the chunin exams. Receiving 3 deadpan looks in return, his smile didn't last long. Not quite the reaction he'd hoped for. That's cool Naruto, congrats. Choji tried to be enthusiastic for his friend. TCH. Shikamaru rolled his eyes and went back to his drink. He was happy Naruto would finally leave his genin title behind, but seriously, the whole thing was way too troublesome. Taking an exam for a rank that far below you? What a waste of time. Dude, Kiba pointed to himself, Choji and Shikamaru, we're all jonin, it's about time, you know. Really, all teasing aside, no one thought less of Naruto for his ridiculously inappropriate rank. Still, it was hard to get excited about your friend's dramatic reveal that he was taking a test everyone else had passed years ago. Naruto slumped back, clearly disappointed with the response. Seeing this, Kiba continued seriously though, I'm glad. It was bullshit you not being able to enter. He paused for a moment to take a long pull from his own glass. Mom was pissed when she heard you didn't get promoted after the war. She ended up yelling at a bunch of the council men. That perked Naruto up, he hadn't heard that, people had been fighting his case. He'd barely spoken a handful of words to Tsume, and she'd fought for him. Suddenly he felt really warm inside. My dad too. Choji chimed in, the whole Akamichi clan really, he said, it's shameful for us to ignore a friend who fought so bravely for all of us. Shikamaru added while knocking back the remainder of his glass. Nara too, most of the clan support you actually. Even the Hyuga support you and they never openly support anyone. At that, Naruto's jaw was left hanging open, stunned. He knew he was better respected now in the village, and being considered the hero of the leaf, he supposed he should have known, but to hear outright that most of the clan supported him, everyone acknowledged him. The implications of that support for his path to Hokage were very clear. Absolutely dumbfounded at that, he had no clue what to say. Working on autopilot, he ended up just chuckling in embarrassment and scratching the back of his head. Smirking at the typical Naruto response, his friends turned back to their drinks. Kiba taking the initiative a few moments later, asking, so, who's your team anyway? I thought you said there weren't any teams you could join. But that Naruto's triumphant smirk returned, haha, that's a secret. At the inquisitive glances from his friends he continued, all I'm gonna say is they're people no one ever expected to see at a chunin exam. Now that was an interesting statement. All three of them puzzled over the meaning. Does he mean a team of genin washouts? Does he know anyone like that? Choji was confused. He's not drafting civilians into the ninja forces as genin, is he? Kiba suddenly had to shake the image of Naruto fighting alongside the ramen lady. It was surprisingly easy to picture actually. DCHA puzzle. Troublesome. Shikamaru decided to figure it out later. Seeing their confusion, Naruto's smirk was positively evil. Kurama's chuckling in the back of his head seemed to agree. Though there were fun times ahead for sure. The weeks passed and before anyone knew it, it was the day before the chunin exams, a certain air of excitement passing around the village. The foreign contestants would be allowed passage into the village today. For anyone interested, it was a good time to head to the main gate and look at the various entrants. Considering it was the first chunin exam since the war, and thanks to the Global Peace Accord the largest by far, the crowd at the gate, normally little more than a few punters, hoping to eye out some potential good bets, was turning into quite an event by itself. Stalls had been set up, and a significant portion of the village had turned up even if just to browse. The noise and chatter increased markedly as the first group came within sight of the village. It seemed the first group to be admitted in would be the genin from the hidden cloud. As they drew within sight, the gossip quickly turned from interest to surprise and shock. At the head of the contingent, leading the other Jonin sensei, was the famed Lord Jinchuriki Killer Bee. As much for his status as the other remaining Jinchuriki as his actions in the war and his wild personality, Killer Bee was almost as famous as Naruto within the elemental countries these days. It was incredibly surprising to see someone like him coming at the start of the chunin exams. Clearly he was here representing the Raikage himself. For him to make an appearance for the finals would be somewhat expected, but to come for the first day of the event was unprecedented. Most decided it further underlined just how important this first United Chunin exam was. Soon enough the Cloud Shinobi were passed through the gates and dispersed, the teams following their Jonin sensei to their assigned hotels throughout the village. B himself seemed to be left behind, taking in the sights, looking around. No one was sure what exactly he was looking for until a loud cry of "Yo! B!" broke above the crowd's hubbub. Most turned to see the village's hero himself jumping down from a nearby building, beckoning B over with a giant smile on his face. It was quite a spectacle by itself. It was difficult not to notice the loud blonde at the best of times, but with Naruto's current popularity within the village, everyone wanted to follow his actions. The stories you'd hear about him were almost unbelievable. Still, although they were easily able to confirm the tales they'd heard of a strong friendship between the two Jinchuriki, the villagers near them had to confess they had absolutely no idea what they were up to. After what seemed like some kind of ceremonial fist bump, they started dancing around each other, making weird seals with their hands and talking in rhymes. That was odd, even for a ninja. The crowd's attention was drawn to the gate again a short time later as the next group came within sight. This time there was a palpable tension in the air. Watching a contingent of rock shinobi drawing close to the village was not a comfortable feeling for a lot of people. For the elder members, it brought back terrible memories from the previous war, where the idea of rock shinobi sieging on the village was a constant fear. For the youngsters it was simply fear and tension passed down. Everyone knew about the animosity between Konoha and Iwa. Everyone except Naruto it seemed, for no sooner had the rock shinobi been granted entrance than he was yelling out "Hey! Kuro-chan!" and waving their leader over to him, and the bright smile on his face fading only slightly at having to dodge a hurled stone in response to the nickname. Now the rumor mill was going haywire. Cloud had sent Killer Bee on the first stage of the exams, and now Rock had sent in Kuretsuchi, the Tsuchikage's granddaughter. The person rumored to be next in line to succeed the title, not to mention Naruto, apparently considered her a good friend, judging by the way he'd quickly introduced her to Killer Bee and was laughing between them, pulling her into their conversation. Clearly Naruto's reputation outside the village wasn't to be underestimated. They'd all heard the tales, but still, you had to wonder just how many cage-level or highly influential ninja was he friends with. It was hard to believe this was the same no-name brat that had been disdained by the village as nothing but a nuisance and a potential danger. After that things died down, Naruto and his friends were talking more quietly by themselves. B still seemed to be dancing, and judging by the weird seals his hands kept making, was probably still rhyming. Kuretsuchi had picked up some of the street vendor food and seemed to be mostly just eating, interjecting the conversation every now and then. It took another hour after the Rock's entrance for the next group to arrive. This time the feeling of the crowd was mixed. Watching Sand Shinobi gain entrance to the village for some brought back all too recent memories of their failed invasion. Luckily, for most those feelings were fairly muted at this point. Ultimately times had moved on. Since the war both villages had sent teams to each other's chunin exams many times. Added to that was the 5th Kazekage, who had proven himself a staunch ally of the Leaf. There were many tales circulating of joint missions with the Sand, both of lives saved and lives sacrificed. Having seen 2 of the great villages send their strongest representatives to look over their teams, the villages were less surprised to see the Kazekage at the head of the group. Still, it was an incredibly interesting development, the Kazekage himself. On the first day of the exams. If it had been perhaps Baki the Unstoppable Blade or even Tamari the Wind Sai, that would have been understandable, but Gaara the 5th Kazekage coming at the head of his genin squad. It was beyond unprecedented. No one was quite sure what to think about the rumors that the alliance was due in large part due to Naruto, that the Kazekage considered him almost a brother. However, a certain credence was given to them when, as before, Naruto called Gaara over to him, smiling madly, and even shook his hand when he arrived. For all his bluster, Naruto was famously terrible at any form of physical contact, most likely due to his upbringing. Some even claimed to have seen the resolutely stoic Kazekage grinning on his way over. That rumor was quickly shut down as an exaggeration. After that, for the next few hours there was a steady stream of minor village applicants. The representatives from Grass, Rain, Waterfall and a handful of other smaller villages. Most of the interest in them was from the people looking to set up gambling odds, aside from a momentarily mournful look from Naruto at the Waterfall ninja and a thoughtful one at the entrance of the Rain ninja. Nothing exciting happened. It wasn't until the early afternoon that the final of the great villages made its entrance. By now Naruto and his group were all seated around a rock table, courtesy of Kuretsuchi, and by all appearances happily trading stories. At seeing the Mist Ninja gain entrance to the village, the rumor mill fired into overdrive again. Having expected to see perhaps one of the 7 swordsmen leading the group, the surprise at seeing the Mizukage herself calmly walking into the village was palpable. Even more so when once again, Naruto's cries rang out, "Hee! Mei-chan. Over here." And once again not only did a Kage listen to him, but actually walk over to him and, after being introduced, sit down on a newly created seat and join them. It was noted she did threaten to boil him alive for using that nickname though. It was almost surreal to imagine that one day that Naruto or any ninja would day sitting down, laughing with and entertaining 4 of the most powerful people in the world. Beyond that, the very idea of hosting teams from all the major villages. To be hosting Cloud Shinobi. Even stranger, to be hosting Rock Shinobi. It was almost unbelievable. And yet, any civilians that were worried or tense at the thought, any retired ninja caught up in memories of a war long past, needed only look to Konoha's current ninja forces. There was no tension in them, there was no doubt, there was just the surefire knowledge that the world had changed a little over a year ago. These were the forces that had removed their cherished village headband and instead adorned themselves with the title of shinobi. They had bled beside a rock ninja, they had screamed for help as a cloud kunoichi passed away in their arms, they had risked life and limb to come to the aid of an overwhelmed Mist team. This feeling, just as much as the sight of the son of the Yonde making jokes at the expense of the granddaughter of the Tsuchikage, was proof of a new age. That night found Naruto meditating in his apartment. Having parted ways with his foreign friends to give them time to settle in and recover, he had nothing else to do. He'd already given up on trying to read or distract himself with attempting to make progress on his ceiling, quite simply he was too excited to settle down. Tomorrow he'd finally get to unveil his great plan. He'd be finally taking the steps towards getting the title he should have gotten so long ago. He'd been halfway tempted to head out to the training fields and just try exhaust himself a little. Ultimately he'd decided that was probably not the best look on the eve of an exam though. Luckily sage meditation was a great cure for excitement. He tried to do it anytime he was overly stressed or needed to calm down. It always amazed him just how much value there was in letting his body tune in with nature. Losing himself in the feeling of the energies washing over him, letting them wash away everything else. Even with Sage Mode it was rather difficult to pick out specific chakra signals in somewhere as dense as Konoha. Still, there were some he knew intimately, the signals of his closest friends. That was why he was puzzled as he noticed in the back of his mind, a number of them were grouping together. They're meeting up, is something going on? They're heading this way. And indeed, after noticing it was impossible to ignore, a group of his friends were clearly heading towards his home, seemingly picking up more as they went on. He had no idea what they wanted, but that was fine. He always looked forward to spending time with friends, especially when he had no other plans. Keeping Sage Mode active, he stood up, feeling them walking up the steps towards his apartment. Chuckling slightly to himself as he quietly moved over to his door, feeling their presences draw closer. One benefit of Sage Mode, waiting for just the right moment, then suddenly yanking the door open with a loud "Hey guys." Just as Sakura was been raising her hand to knock. His sudden appearance and loud greeting sent her jumping back with a startled yelp right into Kiba and Lee, sending them flailing back into the rest of the group, which then dragged everyone else down until finally they all landed in a big heap on the ground. Naruto, ever the tactful gentleman, proceeded to stand over them bent in half with laughter as his friends disentangled themselves. Extending a hand in apology to Sakura and helping her to her feet, wincing slightly as she gripped it harder than was strictly necessary, he decided to break the ice. So, what's up guys? What are you all doing here? Well, what do you think we're doing here? Sakura replied suddenly cheery. We're here to celebrate you finally entering the chunin exam. With that she pushed past him and walked right into his apartment, setting a plastic bag he hadn't noticed till now down on his kitchen table. Naruto was caught off guard at that. Yup. We're here to wish you good luck. Choji grinned happily and followed her in. Cause we know you'll need as much of it as you can get. Kiba finished while he laughed and moved inside, his bags clearly containing alcohol. Hey. Naruto tried again, not quite sure if he was objecting to Kiba's comment or everyone just suddenly barging into his house. Maybe you should take Forehead with you, if she's gonna be knocking us all over like that, Ino grumbled as she too ignored Naruto's protests and walked inside, receiving a glare and muttered insult about pigs from Sakura. We're really happy for you, Tenten commented with a smile as she stepped around him. Yosh. We look forward to seeing your youthful energy during the exams, Naruto-kun. Lee gave an even brighter smile complete with twinkle. All the more impressive when you consider that the sun had already set. Shikamaru settled for a simple nod as he shuffled in. Shino appeared behind him with a typically impassive look. We are all here to celebrate with you. Why? Because you are a friend and we know you deserve this rank more than anyone. It was always a little hard to respond to Shino's way of speaking, so Naruto just nodded dumbly. This was much more than he had expected. Hinata had been hanging at the back with no idea what to say. You can't exactly thank someone for inviting you inside when you're forcing your presence on them after all, and was otherwise simply excited at the idea of being inside Naruto's place for the first time. Panicking slightly as she searched for a suitable greeting, Hinata suddenly had Naruto's full attention directed at her, which unfortunately put her on the spot and caused her to lose all vocabulary. She blushed and settled for simply giving him a bright smile and a small bow as she walked in and settled down with the rest of the group. Normally Hinata would have been berating herself for her weakness. She hadn't been unable to talk to Naruto in months. But right now, she was inside Naruto's apartment, in his living room, on his couch. She'd kick herself later. Right now she was just too happy. So the smile stayed on, even as she attempted to bring the embarrassing blush under control, before Kiba started teasing her again. Naruto was unsure how to respond. They hadn't done anything like this for the last chunin exam. Clearly his friends wanted to congratulate him and wish him luck, having them all here like this, it was an amazing feeling. So, unable to control the grin now placed it on his face, he shut the door behind Hinata, set himself down into the living room with everyone else, and started checking out what they'd brought with them. Sakura it seemed had taken up the position of leader, opening the bags they'd brought and distributing snacks and drinks throughout the room, handing out beer, wine or sake to those that wanted it, juice to those that didn't, and organizing a loud toast. As everyone started to get settled in, Sakura pulled Naruto aside and quietly explained Sai's out on a mission for the next few months, or he'd be here too. He nodded, that made sense, having been wondering where that guy had been. Soon enough everyone was having a good time. Naruto was in an eating contest with Choji, Shino and Tenten were busy keeping anything alcoholic away from a protesting Lee, Kiba was flirting with Ino, Hinata was quietly joining in conversations every now and then, and Sakura was trying to make sure Shikamaru didn't fall asleep on them. Eventually the obvious topic came up and the conversations turned to the chunin exams, with of course a round of friendly teasing directed Naruto's way. "You must be worried, Naruto, imagine being stuck at Genin for even longer." Even Choji had joined in. "I'm not worried at all, damn it. I'm already an incredible ninja." Naruto's patience was never long to begin with. "Boy. Don't look down on chunin. We all earn our rank." Kiba was getting entirely too much pleasure from rubbing this in. Of course, we all got it years ago, so most of your competition will be little brats, you're gonna be playing with kids tomorrow." He laughed loudly at that. That comment had its intended effect, leaving Naruto grumbling and reaching for another dumpling. There was no denying it, part of him did feel ridiculous about that, age aside. He was far too powerful for a chunin exam. Sakura gave Naruto a loyal smile. "Well, that aside, Tsunade-sama thinks we'll probably look to host the Jonin exams not long afterwards, and you've already completed multiple B and A rank missions, so you should be able to go straight through to them." "Really?" That bit of news brought his mood back up. "That's awesome, Sakura-chan. Ha, I'll be a full Jonin before the year's out for sure." Naruto was already imagining how cool he'd look with the Jonin flak jacket on, leading more super dangerous S-rank missions. "Then we'll see who's laughing, eh, Kiba?" Kiba, having been promoted to special Jonin, was still ranked slightly below full Jonin. Naruto's ability to make friends was only second to his ability to annoy them, and that comment of course caused tempers to flare. Of the room only Shino, Shikamaru, Sakura and Lee were full Jonin. "Big talk. You gotta pass these exams first." "Ha, you'll probably funk out of the first test, I heard about your blank exam from last time." Kiba bit first. "That's true, Naruto." Ino chimed in. "Now before you start talking about overtaking us, you should make sure you don't end up embarrassing yourself losing to a bunch of kids." She was unable to resist that last dig. "Hey." Naruto never did well with a bruised ego, things looked about to escalate. Hinata in the meantime had been struggling to get a word in edgewise as the conversations turned to teasing Naruto. She had improved a lot, able to talk comfortably with him one-on-one. However, in a group it was much harder, the embarrassment multiplied, and she ended up second-guessing herself till she couldn't get a word out. Tonight, however, with the aid of a little alcohol running through her system, she managed to gather up her courage, clench her hands into fists, screw her eyes closed, and declare as loud as she could, "Naruto-kun will pass for sure." Just as the man himself had been about to bite back a reply to Ino and Kiba. That declaration stopped everyone in their tracks, all conversation stopping as everyone turned and stared at Hinata. Aside from how out of character it was for Hinata to yell anything, the words had been completely earnest and sincere and yet completely missing the mood of the conversation. No one in the room doubted for a second Naruto would pass the exams. To hear her declare it as if it was a gospel truth. Nobody knew how to react to that. Opening her eyes and seeing the entire room staring at her with utter shock deadpan looks did nothing for Hinata's confidence. "Oh, man. Even Hinata's making fun of me." Luckily Naruto's emotionally stunted upbringing left him able to misunderstand even complete sincerity, and the ice was broken again. This time with everyone laughing and poor Hinata wishing the floor would open up and swallow her, he thought she'd been making fun of him. Sorrowfully refilling her sake cup, she made a silent promise to herself, "I'll do better. I'll talk directly with him even with everyone here, I'll spend time with Naruto before the end of the night." Resolve strengthened, she tuned back into the conversation. "So, more importantly than that, how's your team?" Shikamaru had finally decided to contribute. "Ah. They're awesome. We're gonna blow through the first test tomorrow." Naruto rarely lacked in confidence, only one member of the room having ever seen him doubt himself. For the next few minutes he was forced to fend off inquiries as to who his team members actually were. To the rising ire of most of his friends he proceeded to laugh off the question or claim it was a surprise. "I suppose I'll see them for myself tomorrow. I'm stuck proctoring the first test, it's troublesome." Shikamaru had a pretty decent guess who Naruto had conscripted for his team by now, still, he'd decided to keep his peace and see if he was correct. "Me too," Hinata chimed in, before being cut off. "Oh right. Yeah, you're there to look out for your little sister, right?" Naruto gave her a wide grin, having always wanted a family of his own, people who cared for theirs were at the top of his list of good people. Especially in her messed up clan, there's probably all kinds of crazy Hyuga stuff I don't know about going on too. "That's right," she happily agreed, bright red both at having his attention and at him remembering a conversation from so long ago, especially one that had ended poorly. She's really excited. I'm looking after the second test, Choji interrupted with a grin, moving the conversation away from Hinata's sister and wondering absently why he was getting a glare from Shino and Kiba for doing so. I think most of us got involved in one way or another after we heard you'd be entering. Yup. I'm the examiner for the second test. Kiba announced, giving up glaring at Choji for interrupting Naruto and Hinata. I signed up as soon as I heard you were entering. Yuash. Me and Tenten have been selected to assist with the first test. That's right, Tenten confirmed, you're nothing if not interesting to watch. I wanted front row seats. Me and Shizune have been selected as the lead medics for the final exams. Sakura preened slightly, it was quite an honor, especially under the massive international crowd. And Ino pigged somehow. I was selected as examiner for the final exams. Ino finished, clearly very pleased with that selection. Well, after all, it's not like could put your giant forehead in front of such an important crowd. And with that the two girls started their typical friendly bickering. Shikamaru sighed and lay back down. Shino hastily removed a glass of sake Lee had somehow swiped, and the night continued on with friendly teasing and good humor. End chapter 1. Amik. Honestly, Kiba Hinata chided as she rolled the man in question back onto his side, propping some cushions behind him and putting a blanket over him. Challenging Choji to a drinking contest was never going to end well, and of course it had left her looking after him when he'd passed out. You're sleeping here tonight, she scolded the unconscious youth. There was no way she was going to carry him home. Still attempting to enjoy the remnants of her own slight buzz, she stepped back into the main room. Unfortunately, it seemed the party was practically over by now. Ino and Sakura had left an hour or so ago, Tenten leaving a short while later with Lee offering to walk her home. While she'd been busy with Kiba, it seemed fatigue or alcohol had caught up with Shikamaru and Shino, with Shikamaru snoring on the floor and Shino propped up against the wall. Choji was nowhere in sight, but the front door had been left open, so she surmised he must have stumbled off home. Hakiba must have done better than I thought to send Choji home, she realized as she closed and locked the apartment. Looks like I'm the last one left. Just me, and Hinata was suddenly hit with the realization of just who she was the last one with and where she was. Me and Naruto alone in his house. No, she cut that thought off before it could go any further, trying to maintain her composure. Where is he anyway? Oh no, he's not passed out somewhere, has he? Moving silently through the small apartment, lest she wake someone unnecessarily, she finally spotted the elusive blonde sitting in a corner nursing a glass of sake, the bottle open between his legs, apparently in the middle of a conversation with himself. He's talking to himself. Odd, but oh of course. Talking to the Kaibe? She asked quietly as she sat as close to him as she dared. It was odd sometimes, she thought, thinking that Naruto had this whole other being inside him. Still, she was glad he'd made friends with it. Only Naruto-kun could turn the dreaded Kaibe, the nightmare of Konoha, into a trusted comrade, she thought, suppressing a giggle. Yeah. He paused for a second, looking slightly surprised. He said you should call him Kurama. He seemed amused by this. That's his name, he explained to her confused expression. Oh? I thought you said his name was important to him, that he rarely told it to anyone. He wants me to call him Kurama. Glad the alcohol running through her system was numbing her response, she felt more like laughing than anything else. The nine-tailed demon fox wanted her to be on a first-name basis with it. Yup. He was beaming at her now, clearly he considered this a great honor. He says he likes you. The nine-tailed demon fox liked her, she replied intelligently. He paused for a second again, then frowned. Well, he says, it's cause you almost set him free. Now that brought her back down to earth, she frowned, remembering that day. She'd fully intended to die then, to die without regret, doing anything she could to save the man she loved. The Kaibe had nothing to do with it, she'd never intended at all to release it, she hadn't even known about it then. Guessing her thoughts, Naruto broke her out of her reverie. Just ignore him, that's just him being a jerk. He rolled his eyes at that. No. Seriously, it's cause you're you. He was looking directly at her now, slight smile on his face, but an otherwise utterly serious expression. It was making her rather lightheaded. For the same reason he's friends with me now. You're like me, you work hard, you're strong, he respects that. It's cause of your Nindo. She couldn't help but be cheered up by that, her Nindo. The one she'd taken from the boy she admired and followed with all her strength. The one that had then brought him back from the depths of despair during the last war. Her Nindo, their Nindo. She suddenly felt incredibly warm, smiling back. Okay then, she agreed. Naruto had already acknowledged her. If the Kaibe of Kurama acknowledged her too, so much the better. So, what were you talking to Kei Kurama about then? Your plans for tomorrow? Nah, I'm not really worried about tomorrow at all. He laughed at that. Well, it's kinda silly. I guess I was just asking him if he could slow down my healing factor slightly, just for tonight, you know. That was surprising, she had no idea why he'd want to do that. Seeing her puzzled look, she continued. Ah, it's just, I can't really get drunk. He indicated the now empty cup he'd been sipping on. I mean I can get a bit of a buzz, but it all gets taken care of so fast. I mostly just drink because everyone else is. I've never been drunk, I was wondering what it was like. That made sense, she supposed. I can understand that, I've never been drunk either, not really. Tonight was probably the farthest she'd ever gone, being a little tipsy. Her reasons were different, of course. She didn't have a demon fox inside her, simply the pride of her clan, the thought of someone seeing her stumbling around drunk. Worse. Her father seeing her stumbling around drunk. She shuddered. Naruto laughed again, pouring some more sake and handing her the cup. I can't even imagine you drunk. I bet it'd be funny though. He chuckled a bit more at that, clearly picturing what she'd be like. Similarly envisioning many terrible scenarios, anything from drunkenly draping herself all over Naruto to passing out in the courtyard of her family estate. Hinata quickly decided she had no plans to get drunk just yet. Still, she could feel the buzz slowly draining away, and it had been so much easier talking to Naruto in front of everyone tonight. So, while telling herself she was far too old to think about things like indirect kisses, she raised the cup he'd given her and took a sip. Anyway, yeah, he was just called me an idiot for even asking. He thinks the whole idea is ridiculous, so he doesn't want to talk about it. He snorted at that. Well, she demurred slightly. She could see where he was coming from, but still, it's not really good timing though, is it? Getting drunk for the first time the night before the chunin exam. Hell yeah, I guess that's true enough. He conceded, clearly not giving up the idea, though I'll do it after the exam then, to celebrate. She nodded, finishing the cup and handing it back. That seemed fair enough. Celebrations would be expected after the exams. They stayed like that for the next few hours, trading stories or talking about trivial matters, slowly sipping on the remaining sake, her maintaining a slight buzz, and him mostly just enjoying the flavor. It was a comfortable feeling. They moved closer together, shoulder to shoulder, their conversations getting lower and more muted as drowsiness caught up with them. Hinata, smiling contentedly, her entire body warm and fuzzy with joy, finally gave up and fell asleep, slumping sideways and passing out on Naruto's shoulder. Naruto followed suit not long after. Of course, everyone shifts in their sleep. Later the next day, after recovering from the shock, Hinata was unable to decide if waking up to find her head in Naruto's lap had been the most mortifying experience of her life or the most amazing. Needless to say, she'd spent the rest of the morning bright red and struggling to speak. Thank God I was the first to wake up. Sakura was bored, standing around in the examination building watching the exam hopefuls start arriving was a rather dull experience. As a show of status, all the proctors had been asked to attend. Technically she could avoid it, since she was one of the head medics and not a proctor. Still, she was curious to get a look at Naruto's team. To think Naruto was able to keep something like that a secret for this long. I hope he hasn't done anything too stupid. Speak of the devil, Naruto had just arrived, finally able to sate her curiosity. Sakura looked around expectantly. How he's by himself. He's not gonna use Kage Bunshin, is he? Is that allowed? She giggled at that thought. It'd be just like Naruto to do something like that. I really hope he can finally become chunin. Whatever he's planned, I hope it works. He didn't seem worried, at least, so she contented herself to just looking around the room. Maybe the surprise is yet to come. She thought, idly monitoring the other genin. Spotting trouble off to her left, she spent a few minutes separating an Iwa and AIM team that had been exchanging heated words. They had all been given strict instructions to head off any hostilities before the exams this time around. Moving back over to where Naruto had been, she was surprised to see he was now making animated conversation with both the Mizukage and the Kazekage. Odd for them to be here. They don't seem to be talking to their genin. Surprised by that, she suddenly realized they must have both come just to talk to Naruto. She smiled softly at the sight. 2 cages seeking you out, Naruto? You're truly living up to your boasts, aren't you? Unsurprisingly, it seemed most of the other participants were now looking at the same scene. Heh, I suppose it's not every day you see 2 cages and a living legend this close. Taking a closer look herself, she noticed that neither cage was wearing the traditional robes of office, both were in their standard uniform. They must hate those stuffy robes as much as Master does, not to mention how hard Shizune has to work to get her to wear that hat. She suppressed a laugh at that. It seemed all the cages were cut from similar cloth. On the other hand, if Naruto ever achieved his goal, he'd probably never take either the robes or hat off. Envisioning Naruto in the public baths with the Hokage's hat still on his head, she stifled another laugh. She really did hope he'd become Hokage, if for no other reason than the fact there'd never be another Hokage like him. Shaken from her thoughts by a sudden yell, she saw the imposing form of Killer Bee making his way over to Naruto's group, flashing those weird hand seals he always made before bumping fists with Naruto and loudly declaring, hey, looks like the team's all here. Let's go make everyone else shake with fear. What team? That wait. That statement caught everyone's attention. The whole room suddenly went dead silent, all eyes on the group. Naruto, 2 cages and the 8 Tails Jinchuriki talking about being a team. Numb with shock and acting purely on instinct, Sakura elbowed her way through the growing crowd till she was standing in front of the group. Naruto. What is this? You can't, this is your team. She had no idea what was going on, but knew it was going to be bad. Sakura-chan. Naruto's jubilant explanation was interrupted as the Mizukage stepped forward. Ah, the Hokage's apprentice, correct? Mei offered a slight nod of her head in respect. Sakura had made an impressive name for herself in the medical tents during the last war. Sweeping her hand over her team, Mei announced loudly, "Allow me to introduce my wonderful genin." Ebisu strode forward, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Wait, you're their Jonin-sensei? Their genin. Sakura absently noted Ebisu was the instructor for the first exam, his concern was justified. But of course Mei had a predatory look in her eyes now, sizing up the man addressing her. Even a Kage retains their old rank, they petitioned me to lead them as a Jonin-sensei of the Shinobi Alliance, and so here we are. She inclined her head towards Gaara, Sabaku no Gaara, genin of Suna. Filler B, genin of Kumo. She waved a hand lazily towards B. And of course I'm sure you all know Uzumaki Naruto, genin of Konoha. This time gesturing to the blonde standing beside her. Naruto just sat there with a massive grin on his face, looking like he'd just pulled off the con of the century. As their sensei, their paperwork was naturally processed in Kiri. Now, I believe the exam is starting soon, so she turned and addressed her team directly. Don't let me down. Without even waiting for a response, Mei turned and sashayed out of the building. Naruto laughed loudly, obviously enjoying the whole spectacle before leading his team through the shell-shocked crowd into where the first task briefing was to begin. Barely even acknowledging Naruto's "see you later, Sakura-chan." Sakura just stood there mutely beside an equally dumbfounded Ebisu. He's done something incredibly stupid. The rest of the room seemed to be reacting just as badly, shocked whispers and surprised anger quickly traveling across the participants. One poor girl's panic shriek seemed to sum up the general feeling. Why are 3 S-class ninja taking the chunin exam? Flashback in the mountains near Kumo. Bouncing from rock to rock, Naruto raced along the barren cliffside, feeling the last remnants of the Nine Tails chakra leave him, stumbling slightly as he already knew he wouldn't have long left. All he had to rely on now was his sage chakra and his own reserves, neither of which would last long over such a distance. Being so far from the main body taxed his clone's reserves at an incredible rate. Still, it wouldn't be long now, he was close to his destination, very close. Having traveled here multiple times in the past on diplomatic missions using Sage Mode to extend his senses and pinpoint the exact location of Kumo was child's play. And so a little over an hour later, a bright orange blur jumped over the village walls, raced along the rooftops, sprinted up the side of a nearby cliff, and with a loud yell, flipped through a window right into the Raikage's throne room. Yo. Raikage Jichin. Wa-erk. As it turns out, running straight into the head office of a Kage unannounced at high speed wasn't the smartest possible move. Almost as soon as they detected his presence, he was surrounded by Cloud Anbu and dodging a reflexive strike from the Raikage himself. Knowing that taking any damage with his remaining reserves would be disastrous, he desperately ducked and rolled away, attempting to create some space and defuse the situation. Whoa. Hold up. It's me. Naruto. Whoa. The word seemed to work, stopped his attack and finally took a look at who the assumed assassin was. Naruto. What are you doing here, bursting in like that? You damn idiot. Sorry. Naruto had the grace to at least look sheepish, rubbing the back of his head. I'm in a hurry is all, I'm looking for B, and I sensed him here. The Raikage narrowed his eyes, trusted ally or not, this was family. You're looking for B. What do I? His questioning was interrupted however by the signature sound of terrible rapping. Naruto. You sure know how to make an entrance, you crazy fool. What can the great Jinchuriki-sama do for you? Ignoring the Anbu still surrounding him, weapons drawn, Naruto grinned and walked over to B, rapping a greeting back and bumping fists. Clearly happy for the company, B slung an arm over Naruto's shoulder and they both started to walk off. The Cloud Anbu were unsure what to do, the Raikage just snorted and turned away. Mabui seemed to be the only one to take it upon herself to point out the clear problem. Naruto. You can't just break in here without reason. You don't even have permission to be in the village at the moment. This is an act of aggre. Hey, don't be like that. Naruto's helped us a lot. If he's rushing in, it's too important to stop. It was frustratingly hard to argue with B, it took time just to process his ridiculous way of talking. Even someone like Mabui, who dealt with him 1,000 times, still struggled letting him escape before she could even formulate a response, which of course left her standing there fuming at the idea of a foreign ninja piercing their defenses and no one even worried. She contented herself with glaring death at the Raikage, cutting off his mirth at her frustration at least. In the meantime, Naruto had followed B to a room that he guessed was an unused office. Being in the Raikage's tower, it was guaranteed to be at least relatively secure from people listening in. Shutting the door behind him and expanding his sage mode senses to ensure there wasn't anyone hiding within earshot, he turned to his Jinchuriki companion. "So boy, what's going down? You ran all the way here to visit my hometown." B was clearly in a very good mood. Naruto guessed he was hoping he'd get an excuse for another vacation, luckily that suited him perfectly. "Yeah, see, well it's a bit of a long story. The chunin exam is coming up in Konoha, but there's no team for me." He grimaced slightly at that, it was still a pretty sour taste, but that was why he was here. "So, well look, do you remember when we were talking after the war and you told me not to worry about things like titles, chunin and such?" He nodded, remembering. It had been shortly after the war, Naruto had been joking that at the very least he'd get promoted to Jonin if not straight to Hokage for his efforts. B had scoffed at worrying about things like titles and tried to cool him down. Still, he wasn't really sure where Naruto was going with this. Did he run all the way to Kumo for philosophical advice? "Well, I guess I wanted to ask you more about it. You said you never properly got any of the ranks." He trailed off, biting his lip in excitement. This was the moment of truth, when he'd find out if his whole trip had been a waste of time and energy. "You were passed over too." He considered that. That's an old story, boy. It goes back to when I was just a little kid. Playing at ninja, then sent to the war cause of how well I did." Part of Naruto had been secretly hoping the explanation wouldn't be in rap. It wasn't like he never talked normally after all. Still, B seemed to be on a roll today, and Naruto wasn't one to look the gift horse in the mouth, too often at least. "Things got tight, but I worked hard and defeated everyone in sight. HQ, always giving me more and more to do. Before I knew it, I was leading teams and training new guys too. No time for exams till after it settled. By then I'd already tested my mettle. Acting as Jonin all war, no one cared to test if I was chunin anymore. Then I became the guardian and it didn't matter so long as I didn't let anyone in." He finished his story, smiling broadly, obviously taking pleasure in having managed to string together so many rhyming verses on the fly. Naruto, while impressed, was instead concentrating on wrapping his head around the story, holding up a hand when he thought he had it. "So, one sec, making sure I got this right. You were a genin during the war, and then you guys were too busy with fighting and such to bother with official promotions, and afterwards you'd been acting as a jonin for so long everyone just forgot they hadn't made it official." "Yo. That's exactly right. My story, like my life, is tight." Naruto ignored that part. "Well. That's similar to me, sorta. So, like I said, the chunin exams are coming up and there are no teams in Konoha that I can join. But there's never been anything specific that said your team had to be just ninja from your village. With all the new treaties in place, I was thinking to make a team of people in the same situation as me. We won't be Konoha or Kumo or whatever, we'll just be shinobi, like in the war." He paused for a second, gauging B's reaction. He seemed completely bemused, not sure if Naruto was seriously asking what he thought he was asking. Naruto went for the kill. "So come join my team. You'll get a holiday in Konoha." He remembered B being willing to fake his own death for a vacation before, surely that couldn't help but sweeten the deal, and we can finally become chunin together. B just stared at Naruto. The suggestion was completely ridiculous. Go to Konoha to become a chunin. He hadn't even thought about taking the chunin exams in over a decade. It was so far behind him it was laughable, but hell, it was funny. Shit, it's hilarious. He realized. Before he knew it, he was picturing just how insane it was, him and Naruto, two S-class ninja competing with a bunch of genin. Thinking for a second, he realized that knowing Naruto, the final member, would be just as crazy. He burst out laughing. Even Jayuki seemed to be on board for it. This was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. "Hell yeah, little Kaibe. Let's go show them the might of a Jinchuriki." After a few minutes of cheering for joy and a few more of rapping and planning with B, they finalized their preparations. Deciding to enjoy himself while he was here, he spent another hour just hanging out with B until he started running dangerously low on chakra and released the jutsu to deliver the good news. Flashback end. Flashback heading east, along the Kiri Sea. Skimming as quickly as possible along the water, Naruto regretted his hasty departure for the 1000th time. He'd arrived in Port City in record time, but had quickly found that the next boat for Yuzu and Kiri wouldn't be for another few days. At the time, the decision had been so simple: I'm a ninja, I don't need a boat. I'll just run all the way. Yeah. Great plan, he thought bitterly. It hadn't been so bad getting to Yuzu. He'd made it there in a little over a day, and while sorely tempted to spend time exploring the ruins of his mother's old home, he knew that time was of the essence. Maintaining a kage bunshin for long periods across long distances was almost impossible. Hell, for any other ninja it would be impossible, and it would only get harder from there out. So after taking a light nap, he'd leapt back into the waves and headed off for Kiri once more. Again, the decision had seemed so simple: it'll be quicker to just head straight for Kiri instead of heading southeast to the mainland or to some of the surrounding islands. As a Cage Bunshin time was of the essence, the faster option was clearly the best. Groaning to himself, he wished for the thousandth time he thought that decision out. The problem, of course, was that while running along the sea was trivial to someone like him, sleeping on the sea was not. It was possible, probably, but he had no practice at it and it would take too much of his reserves to even try, leaving him with no option than to stay awake the entire journey. So here he was, blasting along the water at top speed, making great time, but absolutely dead on his feet, with no idea how many days it had been since he'd last rested. Still, he consoled himself, at least he should be there soon, so long as I haven't missed it completely. As he'd been discovering the last few days, it was very hard to navigate without landmarks. He'd been taught to use the stars and the moon in the academy, but he hadn't really been listening. And so, when, unknowable hours later he finally picked up faint chakra signatures at the far range of his senses, he almost burst into tears of joy. Putting forward a desperation effort he drove himself forwards, somehow finally making it to the Kiri mainland. Upon his feet touching dirt he promptly lost his balance, careened out of control, and proceeded to fall into a heap outside a fishing village and promptly pass out. He wasn't sure how many hours or days later it was when he finally woke up, but the first thing he noticed was that it was early evening, and second was that he was surrounded by Kiri Anbu. No doubt they detected the vast chakra he'd been letting off while sleeping. They heightened their alertness at seeing him start to sit up, but didn't make any aggressive moves just yet, aware that while he had arrived in their territory without warning or permission, he was both incredibly dangerous and considered, so far, to be an ally. Pulling himself to his feet while wincing at how quickly his reserves were draining this far away from his real body, Naruto let the last vestiges of nine-tailed chakra fade away and waved to the Anbu he assumed was the leader. "Hey, I need to speak to Mei-chan. I'm in a hurry." Without giving them a chance to respond properly he took off, taking full advantage of Sage Mode to track down the exact location of the hidden village and the Mizukage he was seeking. The Anbu, of course, couldn't just let him just run around like that. Luckily they were only just fast enough to keep him in sight, unable to stop or slow him down while chasing after him. So, trying not to reminisce about his old days being chased around Konoha by various ninja, he flew past the marshy terrain, over lakes, around sinkholes, and was finally within sight of the hidden village of Kiri itself. Feeling the panic distress from the Anbu chasing him, he felt slightly guilty, knowing they must be worried about a potential threat heading directly for their home, one that had made his intentions to speak to their leader clear. Still, he couldn't afford to slow down just yet. He had no time to waste with Anbu. He'd only ever been sent to Kiri on a diplomatic mission once before, thankfully with Sage Mode, and that memory he was able to quickly pinpoint the Mizukage's administrative building and plot a course straight for it. Tearing up the side of the building he rolled through the window, leaped through the doors into the main foyer, and quickly calmed himself and took a seat. Feeling his reserves ticking away he was desperately tempted to just burst in and get down to business, but knowing Mei-chan like he did, that was a good way to get boiled to death, so he felt it was probably best to do this at least slightly diplomatically. Any frustration at this was quickly alleviated from the shock and bafflement he could feel radiating off the Anbu a minute later when they arrived to find their quarry patiently sitting with a bored expression on his face. Ah, it felt good. It was almost like a prank by itself. Part of him missed those carefree days. Of course he couldn't resist messing with people even now. "Boy. What are you guys doing standing around? I said I need to speak to Mei-chan. Go tell her I'm here." The Anbu captain spluttered unintelligibly, clearly not expecting this. More than a decade in the field hadn't prepared him for an S-class enemy ninja invading his territory, breaking into his village, and then barking commands at him. Even worse, he had to resist his instinctive reaction to follow those orders. The man sitting in front of him had an assured commanding presence. Just hearing him giving orders he felt drawn back to a year ago when he'd been following the same ninja into battle for the fate of the entire world. Shaking his thoughts clear he stared down at the boy and desperately trying to think what he would do now. Dare he try take Uzumaki into custody? Dare he leave and go tell the Mizukage that Uzumaki was here? He'd seen and felt just how powerful Uzumaki was. He couldn't stop him, but he couldn't just leave him. It was hard to tell which option scared him more. Luckily he was saved from the choice when a new, equally commanding voice piped in. "I am already here." It had taken less than a moment for Mei to realize Naruto was in her village. He was making no effort to mask his presence. "After all, Naruto-kun, you came all this way to see me? I wasn't aware we had any business scheduled." She favored him a disarming smile. She honestly liked Naruto. He was a unique puzzle in their world, a ninja who would never do anything underhanded. He was a man who would announce his intentions to fight you before throwing the first kunai. For anyone else the idea was ridiculous, yet somehow he always managed to abide his insane nindo. Still, Mei was nobody's fool. She was cautious, even with him. "Ah. Mei-chan." Naruto turned to her, brushing past the Anbu and giving her a smile far too sincere for a shinobi of his caliber. She tried not to wince at the incredibly disrespectful way he greeted her. It helped that she had seen how he addressed the other cages. It had been so funny at first. So funny hearing Ba-chan and Reikijichan right until he got to know her and promptly refused to call her anything but Mei-chan. "We don't really have anything scheduled," he continued. "I wanted to see you though, it's important. I'm putting together a team." But that he started walking towards her office, clearly wishing to discuss it in private. Her eyebrow twitched at the sight he presumed to lead her to her own office. She took a moment to force herself to calm down. If it was any other ninja she'd wring their necks at such an act, but Naruto was just Naruto, it had never even occurred to him that he was being rude. She sighed. Dealing with Naruto always did this to her. "And what kind of team are you putting together? What exactly is going on?" she asked, moving past him and taking her seat, leaning forward onto her hands to examine him. Mei was actually quite worried at this point, thinking about his words. If he needed the power of the Mizukage for whatever team he was drafting, then it must be a catastrophic threat, but then, wouldn't he be here on official business? She narrowed her eyes, definitely puzzling. Fighting back the fear rising within her, she wished with all her heart it wasn't another Madara. For the chunin exams. Truly, it was a testament of the amazing will and pride held by the Mizukage that she managed to keep her head from slamming into her desk at that remark. "Why you came to me about a team for the chunin exams?" She wasn't sure if she should be insulted or intrigued. The calculating part of her put this down as good news regardless. Her intelligence had been unable to discern if Naruto was participating or not. She had no plans to send out her strongest teams to compete against him if he was, they'd be better off doing missions. Deciding this time to start at the beginning, Naruto filled her in on the details of the chunin exams, his barrier to participation, and his plan to put together a team of ninja from around the world under a Shinobi Alliance team. He didn't name names, but she knew enough about Naruto to know that they would be people with unquestionable power. She was well aware of the kind of circles Naruto ran in these days. There was a reason the leaders across the elemental nations listened to this man. He was ultimately a man who could get away with calling the Reikijichan and the Hokage Ba-chan. Still, while this team of his would definitely be interesting to watch, she didn't see how this concerned her. "Well, I appreciate the information, of course. I don't see why you've come to me. I was a jonin even before the Civil War, and even afterwards I've still retained my rank." She let the question drift off, curious what he was after exactly. "Well, yeah, you're a jonin, that's why I came to you. The team needs a jonin sensei too." Her pride once more stopped her from balking at his incredible request, but she composed herself. "I don't understand, there must be hundreds of jonin Konoha could assign for you. If you so wished, there's any number of jonin here you could use as well." Her mind whirled. She was incredibly adept at political games, she knew there was more to this. It was crucial she understand, lest she decide poorly. Why did he specifically need the Mizukage? Why had he come to her? What was he planning? Hundreds of possibilities were quickly inspected and discarded. She couldn't make heads or tails of it, she needed more information. Interest rising by the second, Mei leaned forwards, carefully coaching her expression to give nothing away, yet carefully entice him to share his plans with her. He looked away and scratched the back of his head nervously, making no attempt to hide his embarrassment at his reason being caught out so easily. She wondered for 100th time how he could be as powerful as he was and still be so damn honest. Well, see, I didn't want to get someone from Konoha because I wanted it to be a proper, he made an expansive gesture with his hands, worldwide squad. She nodded her acceptance to that. It made sense, but it didn't answer her other question. "And well, I don't really know anyone else in Kiri," he admitted. Even the great pride and will of the Mizuke couldn't stand up to that. Slapping her hands onto her face, she groaned. Yeah, that sounded about right. He had no plan. There was no ulterior motive. He didn't specifically need the Mizukage. He'd come to her because he thought of her as a friend. This was why it was frustrating to deal with Naruto. Even more so as a master of playing in the proper game of subtle politics. Everyone was meant to have an agenda, every statement a triple meaning and every agreement a trap. Naruto was so damnably straightforward it made him impossible to predict. How do you predict an honest man? She had no clue. The kind of man who would come to the leader of one of the most powerful nations in the world and ask her to join his chunin exam team for no other reason than because he liked her. She groaned again, utterly unpredictable. Still, she couldn't help but appreciate his honest affection for her. She always enjoyed still being appreciated by a man, not to mention his prestige and the fact he was looking more and more like his father every year, if he was only a few years older. She quickly dispelled that notion, not risking that thought getting any further. The last thing she wanted to do today was lament her continuing status as a single woman. Not getting a response from her, Naruto barreled on. "Well, it doesn't have to be you, I could ask Kuro-chan over in Iowa instead. I just thought you might want to tell everyone that this amazing team was reporting directly to the Mizukage." His obvious attempts at manipulation finished with his trademark cheeky grin. That's not a bad idea really, she admitted, surprised there actually was merit in his suggestion. His team would no doubt be ridiculous more than that though, his team's participation made it pointless to send more than a token group of genin, just the ones that needed the experience. There wouldn't be any big clients won for Kiri by Naruto's team stomping everyone, but if she was the Jonin sensei of that team, if the super team was commanded by Kiri itself, now that would look good. Plus she thought to herself it'd be fun just to tweak the Hokage's nose, Naruto's actions had made it clear this was going to be a surprise for her. How annoyed would she be seeing her best prospect giving credit to another village plus, it's been so long since I've been to the land of fire, she looked mournfully at the mounds of paperwork scattered all over her office, it's a good excuse for a vacation. I've always wanted to tour their hot springs, and I've never tried traditional Fireland's sake. Realizing she'd just talked herself into it, she didn't hold back her laughter, the whole situation was ridiculous, everything about this plan was ridiculous, there was no way she could turn this down. Very well. I shall be your Jonin sensei. I'll process your paperwork here in Kiri myself, and we'll keep the details of your participation under wraps until the day of the event. However, now she sharpened her gaze, pinning him and his joyful expression to his seat. I expect an exceptional performance from you and your team. You're representing Kiri as well, I will not tolerate failure. Point made, she halted her glare, smiled to him and reached her hand over the desk. You accept of course. He grabbed it and shook instantly. Yeah. We're a team. May laughed lightly as he danced around the room, marveling again at how insane it was that someone like Naruto existed. The very idea of celebrating a successful negotiation visibly was foreign to her, a simple sire smile could tell anyone who cared to look far too much about your plans. He thanked her one last time and then to her great shock disappeared in a cloud of smoke. She stared across her desk, dumbfounded. She'd been dealing with a cage bunchin this entire time. She hadn't even noticed. Where is he? How far did he send that clone? She sighed. Utterly unpredictable. Flashback end. Flashback somewhere in the Suna desert. The final clone had comparatively little trouble, he'd visited Suna many times, so he was comfortable with the route there. He made good time zipping over the dunes and was somewhat familiar with the location of rest stops or oases he could take a break in and recovers from the heat. It was still far slower than if he had someone from Suna to guide him through the sandstorms or shifting sands, but he made pretty good time. It also helped that of all the cages outside Konoha, Gaara was the most familiar with Naruto's antics. So, when Naruto in full nine-tailed mode sped right past the gate guards, scaled the side of the Kazukige's tower and flipped through a window right into the middle of the meeting he was having with one of his chunin teams, Gaara only sighed. After being sent out and scolded by an irritated Temari about diplomatic relations and why running into a foreign village without any authorization beyond everyone knows me though is considered rude, he sat patiently for an hour and a half while Gaara cleared time in his schedule for him. Finally, standing in front of his friend, Naruto launched into his explanation of the situation and why he'd come. I see. Gaara was a man of few words. Naruto nodded. Yeah, and well, I asked around a bit and no one remembered you going to any chunin exams after. He stumbled here, not wanting to mention the invasion, you know, that one. Back when we were kids. Gaara noticed his discomfort and felt a slight pang of guilt. It still troubled him sometimes to think of the actions of his people against Naruto's, especially considering how lucky they all were that his part in the invasion had ended up being as minor as it had. Still, now wasn't the time, he moved the conversation along. It's true. I never did take a chunin exam after that one. The village was in a dire condition, I couldn't be spared after meeting you. I had changed my outlook, I wanted to try live like you, protecting those precious to me. He smiled at that, it was a nice thought, he'd always been proud of his new nindo, it was still something of an anomaly in the typically harsh mission first attitude of the Suna ninja, but it was something he'd been actively working to pass on to his village. There were no strong candidates for Kazekage, my power was already acknowledged, upon seeing my new outlook and the subsequent control over Shukaku it granted, I was quickly prepared for the position. After that there wasn't time for me to leave the village for an extended period for something like a chunin exam. He thought for a moment. To be honest, it's not something I ever really thought about again. At the time the situation was too dire to worry about and afterwards I was already Kazekage, I could always promote myself to chunin or jonin at any time. Still, you wish for my help with this endeavor. Naruto grinned, he hadn't known Gaara's official rank outside Kazekage, for sure, he'd gambled that the former Jinchuriki had like him, been too busy to bother with something like that. It was good to see his ridiculous luck at gambling continue to pay off. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd like that, sure, it'd be fun. And you'd get to show everyone how powerful you are, it'd be good for the Suna's reputation, wouldn't it? Naruto. Gaara shook his head slowly with a slight smile. No one doubts my power, I've served as Kazekage for years. My exploits are widely known, and ultimately I was the general commander of the Shinobi Alliance forces. Defeating some genin in a tournament isn't going to help my village at all. Naruto hadn't considered that. While he mostly wanted to become a chunin out of pride, he did resent being held back for no good reason. Gaara on the other hand wouldn't get anything out of it. He felt a spike of guilt at that. Suddenly realizing he was being selfish. Still. It's something I can do to assist you. Naruto looked up at that. You'll get someone for the spot regardless. As your friend I would like that person to be me. He was shocked. Gaara was smiling broadly. He didn't think he'd ever seen him smile like that, even after the war had he been practicing. Just as Naruto was grinning back, Gaara continued, after all, I owe you a lot. Something like this is nothing. That brought him back down. No. No, you don't. We're friends. You don't owe me a thing. He definitely didn't want Gaara doing this for him out of some kind of obligation. Gaara was amused. A debt from one of the most powerful leaders in the world just thrown out like it was nothing. Well, in that case, I would like to join you for this for no reason other than to assist my friend. He looked shifty for a second, eyeing the massive stacks of paperwork all around the room. I could use a break regardless. Perhaps I'll leave Kankuro in charge of the village while I'm out. And with that the remaining tension was broken, Naruto laughing loudly, imagining Kankuro's face when he was told that. He would defiantly not be happy. He spent a little more time discussing the details with Gaara. When everything was sorted, he was invited out to dinner and spent the next few hours catching up with all three of the Sand siblings. Waving goodbye later that night, he dismissed himself with a broad smile on his face. Mission successful. Flashback end. Finally breaking through the crowd, Naruto smirked at the shocked whispers going on all around them, the assembled genin struggling to grapple with the fact they'd be competing with him, Gaara and B. Finding the correct room for the first exam briefing, they walked through an open set of double doors, down a short hallway, and ended up in a massive amphitheater. Judging from the amount of teams already inside and those still mute with shock outside, he supposed he shouldn't have been surprised by the size of it. Still, it did really hit home now just how many teams there would be participating. He let out an impressed whistle. Gaara did some quick estimations. There must be at least 200 teams participating this year, perhaps as many as 300. It seems it will be quite the event. Surrounded by a sea of unknown faces, Naruto managed to retrain his instinctive desire to show off and announce his presence. Everyone would find out about him soon enough without him needing to do anything. Instead, they found an empty section and made small talk over the next few minutes, waiting for the rest of the genin to filter in and the announcement to begin. Noticing the lack of desks, pens and paper, Naruto was privately very happy. It didn't seem like they'd be dealing with an exam, thankfully. Regardless of how much stronger he was now, he still wasn't hopeful about his chances in a paper test. After enjoying 10 minutes of B trying to teach Gaara how to wrap, the doors to the room suddenly slammed closed. A smoke bomb going off on the main stage quickly drew everyone's attention as it dissipated to reveal Ibisu and a large number of chunin or jonin from around the village, assumedly the proctors. Wasting no time, Ibisu stepped forward and yelled for silence before beginning his introduction. Hello all. Welcome to the chunin exams. His authoritative tone of voice suggested this wasn't a time to cheer. This will be a short announcement. Now, first off, in case there's anyone with any team members still outside the room, you failed. All members were required to be inside by the time limit. Following instructions is the simplest part of being a chunin. There was a few murmurs through the crowd at that, but it didn't seem to have affected anyone Naruto could see. He did laugh a little at the thought of Kakashi failing for such a dumb reason though. Silencing the room again, Ibisu continued on. Alright. Now, your first task will be a test of infiltration and information gathering. Listen closely because I will not be repeating myself. First, we will now assign you to a briefing station and a time period over the next few days. There's a number of briefing stations all throughout the village, and assignments are random, so don't bother following someone else. Arriving at the briefing station at your designated time, you will sign in and be given details of one of a handful of possible buildings to infiltrate. Inside you will find a scroll containing the information you need to find the second test. You will have 8 hours from the time you sign in to recover the scroll. To pass, all you need to do is have at least one member of your team open the scroll within those 8 hours. He paused, taking a moment to push his glasses up while letting the information settle in. That's all, no questions. Now, come forward as your team and receive your allocation. Team Terumi ended up with a time allotment for later that evening. Having nothing important to do in the meantime, they'd opted to simply go their separate ways until their rendezvous time. Meeting up outside Naruto's apartment that evening, they followed the directions to the briefing station, still puzzling over the seemingly straightforward instructions for the mission. So, an infiltration mission. I gotta admit, I wasn't expecting that. Naruto was slightly worried. Amazing ninja or not, aside from his pranks when younger, he'd never had to do much in the way of infiltration. They didn't say we needed to sneak around, I say we just open up and go to town. B was of a similar mindset it seemed. Naruto considered that it definitely did seem like an easier solution. Wait in, it seems likely they will have posted guards, probably chunin or jonin level, to assess our stealth and stop us he thought for a moment however unlike the other teams, such guards will be unable to stop us. That was a pleasant surprise. Naruto grinned, B's suggestion of just throwing overpowered ninjutsu at the problem had appealed directly to his nature. He would never have expected Gaara, the rational member of the group, to embrace it. Unfortunately just as he was thinking through how he'd go about slamming a Rasengan into the side of whatever building they were using, he realized the problem except we could end up hurting someone like that. Plus Bachan would be pissed if we destroyed a building. Especially if it was important. True, any guards would be just doing their job. Best if no one gets laid out like a log. Indeed. Gaara was sure he could keep from injuring anyone, but B and Naruto's techniques were significantly more explosive and uncontrollable. There would also be a chance of damaging or destroying our objective like that too. Why don't we attempt to sneak in? Then if we run into any problems simply take care of them. Everyone agreed that seemed the best way forward. A short time later, in the early evening they found themselves standing in front of a large multi-story office building, having signed into their briefing station and received a target in the northern side of town. It wasn't an area Naruto was very familiar with, being far from both his apartment and the academy, he sighed at that, it would have been too much to hope for him to already be familiar with the building he supposed. Currently they were hidden behind the roof of a building down the street, waiting to hear back from Gaara's reconnaissance. It is as we expected his quiet monotone breaking the silence as he cancelled his sand-eye technique. A number of guards throughout the building, I wasn't able to make out any clear patrol routes, but there's at least 3 stationed around the perimeter, 2 patrolling and 1 hidden. From their current positions I believe that if we approach from the east, we should be able to make an undetected entrance. That shouldn't be a big problem. Or I could create a distraction with Cage Bunshin. It would be best if we avoided that, at the very least that would tell them we're making our move, we don't know what kind of communications they're using. We'll get in and out sight unseen. Keep it silent, stealthy, nice and clean. Okay Naruto agreed as he made to stand up, let's go then. Wait Gaara held up his hand there's 2 more things you need to know. Firstly the inside seems to be set up like a maze. This building is clearly designed for this test. Navigation will be difficult, it's possible they want us to split up. Screw that. Naruto interrupted not liking the idea of wandering through a maze alone who cares. If we need to we'll find our own way. Splitting just makes it easier to get lost. I agree. In addition, while any of us can defeat any of their chunin guards without issue, it also raises the chances of an alarm. Fighting a number of chunin or possibly jonin guards alone without injuring any of them will be difficult. They were in agreement then, the team would stick together. Secondly I wasn't able to get a good look, but there appeared to be 2 places of interest to us. A room I believe is a central control room and some sort of basement or possibly dungeon a few floors below it. I don't know the purpose for the basement, but it seems likely our goal will be the central control room. Maybe if you get caught you get thrown in the basement. Price of failure if you can't sneak like you're meant. Definitely possible. However, it could simply be a bluff. If the objective isn't in the control room it seems the best second place to check. Alright, we've got our strategy Naruto announced, glad he had someone like Gaara on the team to prevent him and B from just running headfirst at every problem let's get that scroll. But that the 3 silently zipped across the road and started circling around to the east. A few minutes later they were hanging off the side of the 2nd floor of the building, Naruto in sage mode, keeping detection for anyone approaching, while B used his lightning chakra to cut a hole large enough for them to slip through out of the wall. Whoa Naruto exclaimed under his breath as they stepped in they've done something to this place, I could feel it was messed up from the outside, but now, it's odd. Explain Gaara requested, using his sand to hold the wall B had replaced back into position. It's just messed up, it's like there's these fluctuating signatures coming from all over the place. They've put seals into the walls or something. I don't know it's really hard to get a beat on anyone though, I can't sense properly at all. Plus it was starting to give him a headache. Gotta stop sensor types from having it all too easy. Doesn't matter, we'll still get through nice and breezy. B was cracking his knuckles and clearly not too worried about losing their ability to track threats. Let's just take it slow, Naruto whispered as he took point, the others falling in behind him geez, Gaara you weren't kidding, they really did turn this place into a maze. No doubt to further impede planning and impose the time limit on us. It seems very likely they have a reason for wanting us to split up, I shall use sand to mark our trail, in case we need to backtrack. Oh, good thinking. Marking where you were in enemy territory didn't seem that great for an infiltration exercise, but Naruto wasn't worried about being sneaky. Very handy B clearly agreed. Slowly they made their way through the maze. Luckily, it wasn't really as bad as they'd first feared, only having to backtrack a few times with many of the branches simply meeting up further along. It did however manage to slow them down and almost resulted in them getting caught by a patrolling guard many times. Their progress was steady but slow. Naruto estimated they'd probably been inside for around an hour at this point. They still had plenty of time, he just hoped they were heading in the right direction. They'd managed to avoid a handful of guards directly from his hindered sage mode. Unfortunately, a pulsing headache from trying to maintain it inside the building had eventually forced him to drop it. Since then they'd been relying simply on general awareness. Still, despite probably being the least stealthy team, he took solace in the fact that B seemed just as out of his element as he was. Things were going well. It shouldn't be far from here, probably just a few more corners, and we'll be there. This has been pretty easy a cut. And of course, his thoughts were suddenly interrupted as a figure leapt out behind them. Halt. Intruders. Wait, that voice seemed familiar. Surrender and Yuna, Naruto-kun. Definitely familiar. Happily turning around, he saw a figure he knew very well taking a worried step back. Hey. Hinata-chan. Your guard. Hinata paled and dropped back into a defensive stance, eyes wide with shock. This was bad, this was very very bad. The teams were meant to have split up, she was meant to pick off one member, not run straight into 3 cage level shinobi. Why you all came together? She'd head of Naruto's ridiculous team, she had laughed and smiled at the thought, it was something only he would think up. She hadn't even considered facing that team down. This was definitely the worst case scenario. She took a worried glance at Gaara. Rationally, she knew he wasn't the same child who had so callously dispatched the AIM ninja in the forest during the last chunin exams. Still, she'd had nightmares for months after witnessing that, running into him here as an enemy. It was extremely difficult not to remember those scenes, to remember the sand, to picture herself in their place. Gritting her teeth, she refused to let herself remember anymore. She had a job to do, she couldn't give up, she couldn't back down, she would follow her Nindo. Steeling her resolve, shifted her feet slightly, raising her stance, prepared to leap away from being crushed brutally in a coffin of sand. Still maintaining a defensive posture, she looked Naruto directly in the eyes and addressed his team with far more courage than she felt. Stand down. I've been ordered to detain you, you will not be harmed. Naruto had actually been quite happy to see Hinata, it was always fun seeing friends at odd times like this. So, before he could respond to her announcement, he was shocked when he saw a look of absolute terror flash on her face for a second and for her to suddenly leap backwards, just barely avoiding a tentacle of sand attempting to ensnare her. Shocked and confused, he looked over and saw Gaara stepping forward with a look of concentration, announcing in his usual monotone, I will subdue her. Quickly he threw his arm out in front of Gaara and held the other up to Hinata in a placating gesture. Wait. Don't fight. Hinata had become a very close friend to him, perhaps more. There was no way he could stand just seeing her hurt for no reason. Well, Gaara probably had the best chance of detaining her without injury. He'd seen that look of terror on her face, he couldn't do something like that to his own precious people. She's our opponent for this test. We have to fight her. Naruto. Gaara looked over to his friend and tried to reassure him. I won't kill her. He wondered, did Naruto not trust him? No. Look, we can't hurt Hinata-chan. He grasped for a reason, plus she's really strong anyway. Fighting her would make so much noise we'd draw all the guards onto us. This time it was B who shook his head. He had no interest in fighting the girl either, especially not with a chest like that. He noted appreciatively now if she was just another 10 or so years older. He took a moment to picture that, ignoring Jayuki's exasperated sigh in the back of his mind. Refocusing, he turned to Naruto, it doesn't matter how many of them come. She's an enemy, she can't let us pass. We'll just have to slap that ass. That last comment earned him an expected angry glare from both the girl and Naruto. Catching it just out of the corner of his sight. If B didn't know better, he could have sworn he saw Gaara rolling his eyes at him. Still, the comment did get through to Naruto, who had been about to ask her to back down. B was right, in her situation he wouldn't back down. He was well aware of her Nindo, he couldn't ask her to just throw away her pride like that. He could maybe get his team to run, but even if they escaped they'd have to find their way back here, probably just running into her and other guards. Was there really no choice? He despaired. So you need to capture us then, Hinata-chan. We fail if we get caught. She stopped for a second at that, considering, oh no, she knew she probably wasn't meant to tell them this. The only way you fail is if the time limit runs out. I meant to detain you and take you to our holding cells in the basement, giving away information to your enemy so easily. She felt ashamed. It was a terrible habit in a ninja, but she could never ignore questions from Naruto. Ah. He brightened. Well, that's fine, that got everyone's attention. We surrender then. That statement left Naruto standing hands on hips, beaming his usual isn't this great, everything worked out. Smile while everyone else just stared at him dumbfounded. She detains us, we get taken to the dungeon, and then we just bust out and finish. No one gets hurt. No problems. Ara considered this, it was definitely a unique solution. It was also probably the dumbest possible solution to their problem, not to mention it was gambling their entire exam on this. Losing in the first round would be embarrassing. May would probably gut them alive. Still, he sighed, he had known the kind of person Naruto was when he signed up for this. It was one of the reasons he respected the man so much, he never made the so-called terrible choices people talked about being forced to make. Instead he always found a third option and always forced it to work. He retracted his sand very well. He just laughed, he'd been expecting something like this. He was pretty sure May would castrate Naruto when she heard about it, though Naruto, you're too weak against a pretty face. Instantly jumping at the chance to go to her place. Hinata, still overcome with relief at Naruto's announcement, managed not to blush at that innuendo and instead focused her attention on Naruto and Gaara. Alright, come with me then. And so the three prisoners headed off to the basement. Naruto walked beside an increasingly uncomfortable Hinata, trying to make small talk and clueless as to why she seemed so depressed. Hinata struggled to force herself not to just give in and enjoy Naruto's attention. I'm supposed to be doing my job seriously, not flirting with him. She reminded herself I wasn't even strong enough to do my job properly. She dwelled on the embarrassment of a special jonin losing to 3 genin, but quickly dismissed that idea then again. I doubt anyone could stop this team. He amused himself by spinning more innuendo at Naruto and Hinata. They had such strong reactions he couldn't help but tease them. Gaara walked silently, content to simply ponder the whole situation, before stopping and finally announcing his conclusion, I understand the purpose now. Everyone stopped and looked at him. It's a test of loyalty. Very interesting and very appropriate for Konoha. Naruto just looked at him blankly, loyalty? You mean this test? It's testing our stealth, right? Or, do you mean, underneath the underneath? He looked at B, who just shrugged, obviously thinking something similar. Underneath the underneath? Gaara decided to consider that odd statement later. He could see in the girl's face he was correct, no doubt to an extent this exam is to test our infiltration, however there's more, an important underlying test. He gestured towards Hinata, remember she was surprised that we were together? No doubt they expect us to split the teams. The rules clearly state only one member needs to reach the scroll. Your friend here is a jonin, so we can assume that any encounter with the guards will be a defeat for any standard genin team. Therefore the best chance of success for anyone else is 3 separate people running through the maze rather than one group together. He could see dawning comprehension of Naruto and B's faces at that, they were starting to see where he was going with this. But then the rules also specifically state that we don't fail if we get caught. If the teams are split up, no doubt at least one of them will be captured and taken to the basement. The remaining team then has to decide, do they try rescuing them or instead head for the objective? Whoa, so it's a test of the mission or your comrades. Naruto realized that setup reminded him of Kakashi sensei and the lessons he'd learned from the man. Well, it doesn't matter anyway. We'd never abandon a teammate. He grinned, that was a pretty similar attitude to his own. Screw the rules. He'd never leave a friend behind. Kumo in general took more pride than normal in stressing treating your team like family. If Konoha was similar, he'd only like them more. Hinata smiled to herself, enjoying herself watching Naruto's determination, feeling the familiar warmth flow through her. He always managed to remind her why she admired him so much, no hesitation, no doubts, it simply never would occur to him to leave someone behind for all his brash mannerisms. You'd never meet anyone as caring as Naruto-kun. Gaara had lived in a harsh world most of his life and been Kazekage of a struggling nation after finally finding some manner of peace. As much as he admired Naruto's third way, he struggled to truly believe in it. It is unclear at the moment what the lesson will be. It's possible that the basement is heavily guarded. There's no direct reason why going out of your way to rescue your teammates here would increase your chances of success in this mission. If anything, it drastically increases your chances of failure. Perhaps more will become clear soon. Unsure if he'd been expecting anything else, Gaara simply smiled when Naruto reasserted his belief in never abandoning anyone, no matter what stood in your way, and still finishing the mission regardless. Gaara nodded to himself. Even if he couldn't believe in Naruto's worldview, he did believe in Naruto, and that was enough for him want to make it true. After saying a cheery goodbye to Hinata, they settled into their cells, waiting about a half hour before deciding it was about time to break out. They'd been put in separate cells and relieved of any weapons, but beyond a patrolling guard there wasn't otherwise any real enforcement. Gaara had breathed a sigh of relief at not having to worry about chakra restraining seals or similar, and Naruto hadn't seemed worried at all. He wondered if that was knowledge that such seals wouldn't work against a Biju, or if they simply hadn't even thought about it. The first order of business was to break out of their cells and meet up, a task that, while very difficult for a standard genin, was beyond child's play for them. Naruto, complete with his usual sense of subtlety, announced loudly it was time to finish this test and quickly formed a Rasengan to smash into his cell bars. The flying steel crashed all around the basement and probably caused enough noise to alert every guard in the entire building. He laughed and used his lightning chakra to cut his bars open. Gaara grimaced and forced his way out with his sand, not bothering to keep it quiet after Naruto's performance. The patrolling guard had turned out to be a Mizubunshin and had been summarily defeated in seconds. That was a definite surprise, but from the sounds of more footsteps heading their way there wasn't time to dwell on it. Raising his hand he blocked the entrance off with a wall of sand, hopefully that would delay anyone heading their way. Come. We're going up. Giving them no time to question him he formed a platform of sand under their feet and used it to raise them to the ceiling. Naruto, understanding his intentions, quickly summoned some clones and formed a Rasengan to smash a hole through. Sealing the hole with another wave of sand as they passed through it, he repeated the process. In no time at all they'd blasted their way through 3 floors and were back where they should be. Covering the last hole he stopped to get his bearings and catch his breath. He was still good to go, but that had required quite a lot of sand. Luckily he could see some familiar landmarks. We should be close now. We're back on the floor with the central control room. Most of the guards should still be stuck down in the basement. Works out perfectly, a clear run to the prize and no one for Naruto to surrender us to. Let's get going before they catch up. Fu. Gaara held up his hand before Naruto could voice his obvious displeasure with that. At this point he declared stealth would be counterproductive. Naruto and B both looked at each other, then grinned at that, who didn't love a chance to go all out. Soon the hallway was full of Naruto clones forming Rasengans and B's tentacles whipping around in his tailed beast form. Just point us in the right direction. And so, after simply destroying everything in their path, a few minutes later they were standing in a surprisingly bare control room, picking up what they assumed to be the mission scroll. B's victory rap was drowned out by the sound of one of the walls behind them collapsing. The floor they were on was an absolute mess, whole walls, doors and corridors left as little more than dust and splinters, the ones that still stood had massive holes gouged out of them. Naruto smiled broadly. This was the best kind of mission success as far as he was concerned. Everyone had completed the test, no one had been injured, and he'd gotten to cause massive property damage. Yup, he thought, looking proudly at the destruction around him. Fun mission. His mood was slightly soured at the sight of Gaara blocking off all access to the room with walls of sand, assuring B that there was no need to take chances. That struck him as slightly unfair, considering they'd practically finished the test now. Geez. You surrender your team one time. Returning his concentration to the matter at hand, he cracked the seal on the scroll and spread it open, then jumped back with a yell as it exploded out of his hands, and with a distinct pop his apparent Jonin sensei was standing before them in a cloud of smoke. Mei-chan. What are you doing here? Naruto asked, still reeling back from the sudden shock. You have the directions to the next exam, Mizuki-sama. Gaara decided to try a slightly more tactful route. I do indeed, Kazuki-sama. She favored the more polite boy a warm smile and strode towards him, sweeping her gaze over the assembled team, the crumbling wall of sand, and the ruined office. Congratulations on passing the first test. Gaara gave a contented nod. Naruto and B whooped and bumped fists. It was a small milestone, but it was important to overcome regardless. Regaining control, Mei continued, your next challenge will be in 3 days from now at Training Ground 58. It will start at 8 AM sharp, so make sure you arrive on time. Pausing for a second to let them absorb that, she finished, aside from that the only other information I have for you is that it will be a test of hunting and survival. So I recommend you brush up any relevant skills in those areas. Now she adopted a predatory smile. You summoned me here just as I was about to get some dinner, so why don't you apologize by taking me out and we'll all celebrate your victory today. Yeah. Naruto whooped. Let's get so. Not Raymond. The other 2 members interrupted instantly before looking at each other surprised. Cutting off Naruto's protest, B explained, every time we've eaten with you so far it's been ramen. I want to try new cuisine, not the same old bar, man. No need to worry. Mei smoothly assured them, in my time here I've discovered a great deal about the village, including an amazing sushi restaurant you can all treat me to. Come. And with that, Gaara released his walls of sand and Mei made to saunter out of the room before stepping out of the doorway and stopping in shock. While she couldn't believe her eyes, the place was ruined beyond words. Whirling to look at Naruto, she had to ask, wasn't this meant to be an infiltration mission? He had the decency to look embarrassed, not meeting her eyes. Well, you see, we intended to sneak in. We were really stealthy for a while. And so, realizing that they'd managed to avoid hurting anyone, they'd messed up all the other pre-mission plans they made. Naruto looked again at the devastation he'd caused and came across an important point. Oh shit, Bachan's gonna kill me. He was deathly pale at the thought of her seeing this. Any possible response was cut off by the sound of one of the walls behind them giving out completely and a huge section of the building collapsing in on itself with a thunderous crash. Good morning, Genin. Jolting awake at the loud voice, Naruto realized he'd somehow fallen asleep while waiting for the second test to being. That's what I get for arriving too early. I couldn't remember when she said it started though. Blearily opening his eyes and looking up, he saw his team had found him at least, B laughing at him and Gaara shaking his head in exasperation. Looking around, he was surprised to see how many teams had arrived. It was hard to count, but there seemed to be at least 100 participating in the second test. A big crowd for sure. Wait, is that? Looking at the direction of the loud greeting, he saw a very familiar sight, a large brown-haired man riding a giant dog. "My name is Kiba Inuzuka, welcome to the second exam." "Well, no way, Kiba's the examiner here." "Huh, I think I remember him saying something like that." "Better him than that snake lady again," Kurama offered. He hadn't enjoyed the fear of an unstable Jonin cutting down his host any more than Naruto had. Now that is definitely true. Naruto had worked with Anko many times. He knew how skilled she was, how dedicated she was to the village, still didn't change the fact she freaked him out. But the various chatter dying down, Kiba continued his introduction. "Now, before we get started here, I want to talk about the true meaning behind the first test." That grabbed everyone's attention. Kiba paused for a moment, clearly soaking in the spotlight. "Most of you here probably had at least one teammate get captured, so you will have noticed you had the choice between going after the mission objective and rescuing your comrade. Now, as you're probably taught, you should always prioritize the mission. That's an important lesson, you must complete the mission. However, there are also consequences." Seeing comprehension dawning and horror dawning on some of the teams, he continued, "Of course, you should finish your mission, but you should never leave a comrade behind if you have the ability to save them either. And so, those teams that left someone behind to jail or death now have to deal with the consequences of doing that. You don't get that teammate for the remainder of your mission." Cutting off any protests, Kiba laughed loudly at the shocked group before him. "They even made it easy on you. If you'd bothered to check, all the prison guards were just types of clones. Any genin team would have been able to overcome them. But some of you didn't even try." "Ah, I wondered if it was something like that." Gaara looked impressed. "So now we understand the full reasons behind the choice of saving or sacrificing your teammate. Very nice, abandon a teammate and you have to deal with being a man down. No doubt most of those here thought of each test as a separate mission, not one large one." He nodded his approval. It was a good lesson. Tsuna may have some of the harshest teachings of the hidden villages, but their economic woes meant prioritizing and valuing assets was considered vital to any team. Carelessly abandoning a trained ninja was wasting a huge asset. Doing so without proper reasoning was ridiculous. "So?" Kiba yelled, making himself heard over the shocked cries going on around the audience. "Anyone who was still in the cells when time ran out during stage 1, you might as well leave. We already know who you are and you won't be getting any of these." That said, he brandished 2 headbands, one red, one black. "To those leaving, remember who abandoned you. To those staying, remember the consequences of abandoning a teammate halfway through a mission." He gave that a second to think in. "Now, let's get started on today's test." With those words, a group of assembled chunin that Naruto hadn't paid any attention to previously began moving through the groups, passing out the standard death liability waiver he'd seen the last time he'd been at stage 2. Looking around while he waited to receive his own form, he was surprised at just how many people were eliminated from the first test. At least half of teams were down at least one member, some were down 2 with only a single person left to complete the exam alone. He smiled at that. Aside from the fact it benefited him, it was nice to see a test that had essentially backed up his own personal philosophy. No one should abandon their teammates, especially when they had a possibility of rescue. Part of him was sad at seeing so many people had such a different outlook, but hopefully this lesson could change that. "These waivers are simply to absolve us of any responsibility if you die." He gave a predatory grin at that. Naruto wondered if he was attempting an Anko impression. "As for the test itself, I think you like it. It's about hunting." "Yeah, Inuzuka, I should have guessed." Naruto just barely managed not to roll his eyes. At least Sage Mode would help. "As you can see, there's a number of stations set up around the perimeter. When you hand your forms in, you'll be checked to ensure it's the right members competing, then given either one of these." He brandished the black bandana if you're a hunter, and one of these. This time he lifted the red bandana if you're the prey. Showing amazing restraint, Kiba only took a few seconds to grinning maliciously at the younger genin. "You'll hand your forehead protectors in at the station. Don't worry, you'll get them back afterwards and replace them with whichever bandana. It must be secured to your forehead and it must not be removed. That's how we're tracking who's still playing. They've got a seal on them. Anyone who loses their bandana is considered dead, so if you lose yours, just stay still and wait for our medics to scoop you up. Other than that, it's as simple as can be." Red teams are given a scroll with information to get to the tower at the center of the field. You'll be assigned a random gate and have 3 days to get it there. Black teams will also be assigned a random gate. You'll have 3 days to intercept the scroll from a red team and bring it to the tower yourself. Oh, and just to make it fun, there's going to be 2 black teams for every red team. Think of it like competing for information against a foreign village. Anyone left in the forest after 3 days fails. Get the information to the tower in time or you lose. Naruto paused for a moment to take it all in. It seemed reasonably familiar to the second test he'd done as a kid. It was different in a number of key ways, but relatively straightforward. The biggest potential issue would be the competition between black teams for red team scrolls. Red teams will have a 30-minute head start. The test begins 1 hour from now. I suggest you get to your stations. Another wave of shock spread over the crowd at that. A 30-minute head start seemed very small. That's a lot of pressure on the red teams, Naruto supposed, but then on the other hand, if you're fast enough it's no pressure at all. Just run straight to the tower. Looking through the gates to the training ground, he somehow doubted it'd be quite that easy. Giving Kiba a quick wave to show he'd appreciated the speech, Naruto turned away and led his team towards the nearest registration booth. He had obviously been thinking things through. The lesson from the first test most likely continues here. If you lose your bandana you're going nowhere. You mean if one of us gets eliminated here we won't be able to participate in the finals too? That does seem likely. It would also limit the number of potential matches. I doubt Hokage-sama has any wish to hold too many bouts. Well. No problem. We'll just knock everyone out here and keep our bandanas. This is gonna be simple. You seem surprisingly calm about all this, Tsunade-sama. The woman in question looked up from her work, visibly glad for a distraction. I guess so. It's mostly out of my hands at this point, Shikamaru. He grunted, moving over to lean against the wall. I'm surprised you even let Naruto's ridiculous team enter. She laughed at that. I didn't have much choice really. I told that brat if he found a team I'd let him form one. Plus with so many other cages involved it'd be a mess either way. Anyway, she reasoned, he's probably doing us a favor here anyway. We've got way too many applicants this year. With the backlog from the war and so many other nations competing. I was getting a headache just thinking of how we would possibly host the finals. This is perfect. We can just let Naruto clear the field. It's still going to be a pain, Shikamaru pointed out. I saw the numbers for the second test this morning. There's just over 80 black teams and about 40 red teams. That could get messy. It could. Hopefully it doesn't get too bad though. We're expecting a majority of the fighting to be between the black teams. It should be slim pickings finding a red team since they'll be doing their best to escape. I've got Shizune and Sakura's medical division on standby, but hopefully it won't be too lethal this year. How troublesome. Shikamaru did some quick mental math. We're obviously not expecting all 40 teams to pass, probably around 30 or so at most. Then I imagine we'll host a team preliminary elimination. That'll knock us down to about 10 to 15 teams. That's still a lot for the final round. Tsunade, using the time-honed technique of procrastination, waved his question off. No point worrying about it. We'll host a second elimination round or do a battle royale for the final round or something. Seeing he wasn't going to get any more plans out of her than that, Shikamaru took her advice and stopped worrying. No point making plans anyway really, knowing Naruto they'll just get messed up regardless. We're black, Naruto complained, a black bandana secured on his head where his forehead protector would normally be. I was kinda hoping to be red. They were a few minutes inside the training ground 58, he took a moment to survey his surroundings. Definitely not what he'd expected. He'd been thinking along the lines of the forest of death, but this was far more hills, crags, valleys and rivers. There was plenty of trees and foliage around. It was still Konoha after all, but it was very difficult terrain to navigate. That's probably the point, he conceded, probably an Anbu training ground or something. The tower in the center loomed far in the distance, seemingly at the bottom of a vast valley. At a guess he thought it'd probably take a standard genin team almost the full 3 days to reach it. Still, they weren't a standard genin team, so there was no reason to act like one. Stopping on a tree branch, he held up his hand to halt his teammates. Okay, hold up for a sec guys. Let's make a plan. We have a lot of ground to cover and none of us are particularly adept hunters, Gaara calmly pointed out their problem as he landed beside Naruto. Well, Kurama can probably help me out with tracking. Oh? You need to rely on my power for your chunin tests. Kurama's mocking laughter changed Naruto's mind about that. Fine. I'll use Sage Mode then. He bit back, sitting down and beginning to meditate and pull natural energy to himself. He had his own plan. It seemed we shouldn't limit ourselves to just the teams in red. The more we take out here the easier we can put the third test to bed. I hadn't thought of that, Gaara conceded, considered it. I was thinking to just track a red team down and aim to pass as soon as possible, but yes, you're right. We should aim instead to remove as many teams as possible from this test. Looking around he saw a problem though, although with an area this large to cover we will need to split up. More than one of us against any genin team is unnecessary regardless, he noted. Hey? You guys want to take off? Naruto stood up, taking a second to relish the feeling of natural chakra empowering his body, widening his senses to reach out and feel all the chakra signatures around him. It's a contest. Whoever gets the most headbands to the tower by tomorrow is the best. The great Jinchuriki-sama Killer Bee will take care of anyone in the west. I'll head east then, Gaara supplied. So, I'll just head north then. Straight to the tower. Naruto frowned at that, it didn't seem likely he'd run into anyone that way. There's plenty of ground to cover in the northwest and northeast, I'm sure you'll find plenty of teams with that. Gaara swiftly jumped off to the east. Yeah. This is gonna be fun. Watch out, pray, here we come. Bees gave a quick wave and headed off to the west. Northeast or northwest, eh? Well, why not both? Cage Bunshin really were the answer to everything. A second later, an excited-looking clone was heading off into the northeast and Naruto himself was running up a crag to the northwest. Kicking ass, creating rhymes, this exam is full of good times. He was running down a valley rapping to himself as he tucked a handful of bandanas into his pouch, crashing along the terrain. He took a moment to marvel at his luck in managing to hunt down so many teams within only a few hours of the exam. It did leave him feeling a little guilty at defeating teams much weaker than him, but that was the rules of the game and he was playing to win. He didn't have any specific tracking skills, nothing beyond what he'd learned as a young man for the war. That was fine though, he'd used those skills countless times on the field, he was far better than any standard genin. The red teams were too focused on running and the black too intent on chasing. He guessed he'd only been going for a little over 3 hours and he'd already hunted down 2 red teams and 6 black teams. Slowing down, he focused on something that had suddenly grabbed his attention. Hastily covered rock, broken twigs and most damning of all, a fresh sandal imprint. They looked to head down a long small ravine and towards the tower. He took a second to consider, either the tracks of a group moving too hastily to cover their trail or someone leaving an impressive false trail. Well, only one way to find out. And so with a whoop he leapt across the rocks, chasing after his latest prey. A short while later his tracking paid off, moving silently, he spotted the team he'd been tracking slouched down among some trees in a small clearing up ahead. Not seeing any need to be stealthy around, Genin B simply leapt right into the middle of their group with a loud cry. Noting absently from the bandanas it was another red team. They were clearly exhausted, breathing hard and bleeding in multiple places. It appeared he'd caught them in the middle of binding their wounds. Most likely they'd barely escaped another fight earlier in the day, which explained the hasty tracks at least. Flashing them a predatory smirk, he gave the team a quick once-over. They were all just kids, younger than Naruto even. Pausing for a second, he noticed that they were all dark-skinned, that 2 of them were holding head swords, and he was pleased to note they all seemed to recognize him, judging from the dawning looks of horror on their faces. He noted. You all are from Kumo too, eh? Well, hurting comrades never feels right. Why don't you surrender? No need to fight. He emphasized that last line by drawing a kunai and running a visible amount of lightning chakra through it. No need to fight, but if they tried, it would be over quickly. The kids, if possible, looked even more terrified at that. No doubt they were all familiar with stories of their hero, the great Jinchuriki-sama. B took a moment to preen slightly. He always did enjoy being acknowledged like this. It was one of the few perks of being the guardian of Kumo. Just as he was about to repeat his offer of surrender, one of them stepped forward. He had short red hair and had covered his body in a brown overcoat, his legs were clearly shaking, but his eyes remained hard. Clearly this kid was drawing up his courage. He gulped, opening and closing his mouth a few times before finally speaking up. We're all just surprised to see the man with an octopus in his soul, the power of a raging demon, but Killer Bee's in control. He was shocked. That he had not expected. He'd already run into 2 Kumo teams, they'd either tried to run or just surrendered straight off. This was different. Actually, no, this was great. He laughed loudly, it echoed throughout the clearing. Your flow sucks, kid, you better settle yourself down, let's rap for a while. You can learn from the master Killer Bee and get yourself some style. A few hours later, after sending away his 3 new budding rap pupils to head for the tower, B resumed his quest to clear out the competition. Naruto was leaping from tree to tree in a rough northeast direction. The terrain here wasn't too difficult to navigate, so he was making good progress hunting down the closest signature he could feel. It was almost the end of the first day, but he doubted he'd manage to maintain sage mode until nightfall. He wished he'd taken a bit more time to gather nature chakra at the start of the day, even just tracking teams had gotten harder, his senses far less acute with such a limited amount of nature chakra left. Still. I've been pretty successful. He praised himself, it had been a pretty busy day really, having already defeated 6 separate red teams and more than 24 black teams. Sage mode had made it almost too easy, he could track down anyone even remotely near him with perfect precision. Being far faster than any genin, catching up and chasing them down was no trouble at all, even groups with sensors of one kind or another had no chance. He had attempted to make it as impersonal as possible, simply defeating teams before they even had a chance to react. He didn't want to hurt anyone, and if nothing else it saved his chakra. And as he got closer he could feel a number of signatures coming from up ahead. One in particular stood out to him, though it was vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it. Putting it out of his mind, he focused again and realized there were multiple groups fighting up ahead. Well, this'll be the last for now. I'll keep these guys around, then take some time to get more sage chakra. I've still got plenty of energy left, it's just a matter of maintaining sage mode. Plan formed, he pushed himself forwards even faster, flipping through the air with an amazing burst of speed. Konohamaru in many ways was like Naruto. He was a spunky kid with too much energy and a deeply held desire to prove himself. He didn't take criticism well, but was willing to work hard to achieve his goals. Having been inspired by Naruto, he had a similar nindo to him, and ultimately he had the same end goal, to be the Hokage, to protect the village and those close to him. Like Naruto, his goal had originally been a selfish desire for acknowledgement, and like Naruto he'd grown out of it, instead getting acknowledgement through his actions as a ninja and the friendships he'd made. His signature techniques, the Kage Bunshin and the Rasengan, and technically the Warrick no Jutsu, were all taught to him by Naruto. He didn't have Naruto's ridiculous chakra reserves to power them with, but he did have good control over the chakra he did have. Even despite the high chakra cost, they were very powerful techniquist for a genin to have. Exactly like his boss, he'd been ecstatic at the idea of taking the chunin exams, for the same reason, taking the first step towards being Hokage. And, unfortunately for Konohamaru, like Naruto in his first attempt at the chunin exams, he would run into an incredibly dangerous S-class ninja. A chilling laughter was the first sign he had of any danger. It froze him dead in his tracks, a shiver running down his spine. Dread settling in, Konohamaru slowly turned around and saw that his team had already been captured and subdued. Well, what do we have here? It was very clear just how much trouble he was in. Oh shit. Dashing through the trees, Naruto could tell he was finally getting close to his target. He could hear the sounds of combat coming directly ahead of him. Whoever that familiar chakra signature was, they were definitely fighting for their lives. But that thought in mind, he put on a final burst of speed, streaking from tree to tree at near his top pace, barely more than an orange blur to anyone watching. Focusing his senses outwards through sage mode, he judged his proximity to the targets ahead of him, angled himself towards the one in the back, gave one last leap, and… over the scroll. You're out. Gwa crashed right into the poor sap. Whoa. Now that's an entrance. He whooped, crouching on the stunned heap below him. It was always nice to make an impact. Judging from the twitches of the guy lying below him, he'd left quite an impression indeed. Standing up, he took a moment to look over the clearing. It was a complete mess by now. Kunai and shuriken littering the landscape, with large gouges cut out of the ground or rocks where heavier weapons had missed their mark. Judging from the way the teams were positioned, it looked like two black teams had grouped together to hunt down one red team. The red team looked to be putting up a valiant effort, but they were losing badly. One of their members having lost their bandana, lying on the ground unconscious, the remaining two were desperately fending off their assailants. No one's even noticed me. Naruto pouted so much for his awesome entrance. Wait, hey. He suddenly understood the chakra signature that had seemed so familiar while he was tracking this group. Hey. It's Hina. Wow, you made it to the second test. That got everyone's attention. The other genin all turned to look at this man casually walking up them, interrupting their life and death battle, while giving a cheery wave with a bright smile. Oh, you're on the red team. Huh. Looks like you're having a hard time, eh? Hanabi let out a slight sigh of relief. She didn't know Naruto all that well, but she did know her sister thought the world of him. At the very least, his appearance and greeting had gained the attention of the three opponents she'd been desperately defending her scroll from, giving her a momentary respite. She was never quite sure what to think of Naruto. He really was everything the Hyuga weren't. In some ways she really liked that about him. He was open, he was caring, and he made her laugh with his crazy stories. Of course, in other ways it also infuriated her. At the very least, she wished he'd stop calling her Hina. She was almost as tall as Hinata Ni-chan these days. Resisting the urge to stomp her foot at that thought, she decided to hope he was here as a potential savior rather than a scavenger, despite the color of his headband. Naruto-san, wow. Anything further she'd intended to say was cut off as she desperately leaned her head back to avoid a vicious lash across the jugular. Quick. Get the scroll and let's get out of here. The one who just tried to take her head off barked. They came at her even more aggressively than before. Clearly they were worried about Naruto's interference and wanted to end it before he could react. Defending herself desperately, she forced herself to ignore the wound she'd already received, focusing on avoiding their weapons, searching for an opening. Naruto was taken aback by their sudden assault on Hina. With the exam being little more than a game to him, it was easy to forget that for everyone else this test was still life or death. His rational mind told him that everyone in this clearing was an opponent and he should defeat them all, or at least let them fight it out first. Luckily, Naruto had plenty of experience filtering the rational part of his mind. Hey. You bastards wanna fight? Fight me. He liked Hina, he didn't really know her that well, but she was Hinata's precious sister. That was more than enough reason. Naruto would never sit idly by while someone he cared for's precious person was hurt in front of him. Hanabi didn't even have a moment to look over at Naruto after his declaration. With 3 people attacking her, she couldn't spare a thought for anything except a desperate defense, unable to even counterattack. She rolled backwards to dodge a sword slash, pirouetted forwards to avoid a barrage of kunai, twisted her body away from another barrage of sword slashes. Her form was perfect, her stance was strong, unfortunately she was already bleeding, and fatigue was fast catching up to her. Ducking under a roundhouse kick, she was a moment too slow in creating space and caught the follow-up kick in the stomach. All the air rushed out of her as she slammed backwards, landing heavily against a boulder. The pain of the impact and the shock at being winded left her momentarily stunned, her entire body screaming in pain. Looking up, she saw her opponent already charging forward to finish her off, eyes set on securing his victory, lunging forward to impale her. She'd only been stunned for a moment, her body's reactions only slowed for a fraction of a second, but that would be more than enough. She had no time to dodge, no time to move, no time even to fear. The perfect example of Hyuga pride, Hanabi simply glared back at the man about to kill her, refusing to back down for even a moment. She glared death at him right until he suddenly wasn't there anymore. Rasengan. Huh? She blinked and looked again, utterly bewildered. Where the man had been, Naruto was now standing, arm outstretched, holding a quickly dissipating ball of energy. She stumbled forwards and took a moment to look around. Where just a few seconds ago the clearing had been full of combat, now there was nothing. Her teammates were collapsed next to each other, with Shinji tending to the injured Yasuke. The teams attacking them had been thrown all around the area, slammed into trees, rocks, or even just straight into the ground. None of them seemed like they'd be getting up anytime soon. He took them all out in a second. She knew he was strong, of course, everyone did, there were a million stories of his adventures, but still, she'd never witnessed anything like that. Not even from her father. Suddenly she felt herself pulled forwards, felt Naruto wrapping his arm over her shoulder and bringing hers over his, obviously worried about her injuries. Unused to any sort of physical affection, Hanabi was shocked to find she had instinctively leaned against him, and worse, she was blushing at the contact. Her mind was reeling as she was led back to her team. Embarrassed, she fought to keep her composure. I won't be as bad as Hinata-ni-chan. No way. Finally feeling the last of her adrenaline fade away as the fatigue took over, she sat heavily on the ground. Leaning against a tree beside her teammates as she watched Naruto calmly walk around the clearing, humming to himself and collecting the headbands of everyone he defeated. Task done, he turned and flashed a bright grin. Don't worry, I'll leave you guys alone. I've got plenty of red team scrolls already. He patted his pouch at that. Hinata-chan'd be mad at me if she heard I was picking on her sister anyway. Laughing at that thought, he walked back over to her group and sat next to her. You busy day? I need a break, and with that she watched him shut his eyes and concentrate on his breathing. Puzzled at his behavior, she suddenly noticed the coloring around his eyes as the sage mode. She'd heard whispers of the power of sages and the respect Naruto had gained in attaining it, but didn't know any details. Is that why his eyes? She spent a few more seconds examining the odd coloring before sinking back against the rock and relaxing. Looking at her team brought a smile to her face, very glad they both seemed okay. Shinji going down had been an incredibly scary moment. Yasuke's injuries looked bad, but he assured her it only looked bad, they were bandaged now, and his movements didn't seem to be affected too badly, he'd be fine to move in a few hours. She nodded, that was good, they could still do this, they could still win. Thanks to him, she thought, turning once more to her savior. He defeated all of those ninja in a second and then sits here and mediates right in front of us. We're also his enemies, but he doesn't even think twice about it. He knows we're not a threat to him, even like this. She suddenly felt a shudder go down her spine at that thought and was surprised to find herself become slightly warmer, blushing again. I knew he was powerful, but after seeing it firsthand I think I see what Hinata-ni-chan sees in him, she thought with a shy smile as she laid back and relaxed, watching him mediate. She was wrong, of course. Hanabi looked at Naruto now and saw his strength. Hinata had been looking at Naruto most of her life, she loved him for his weaknesses and his will to change them. Meanwhile, on the northwest side of the training ground, the real Naruto was standing with his hands on his hips, looking down at the terrified genin ahead of him, sorely tempted to let out another evil laugh. Putting on his most devious smirk, he slowly stepped forwards. Konohamaru, fancy meeting you here. Boss. What are you doing here? Konohamaru stumbled backwards, looking desperately for any support he could get. Unfortunately, his teammates were both being securely held by Naruto's clones. What do you mean, what am I doing here? Wasn't this our rivalry for chunin? Weren't you going to become a squad leader and boss me around? Naruto pulled out a kunai and started twirling it around his finger as he continued to stride towards the boy. Didn't you say you'd surpass me? Ekinohamaru-sensei. Lacing the title with as much sarcasm as he could muster, he stopped directly in front of the reeling genin, using his height to leaning down over him. Come on boss, haha, you're not mad about that still, are you? Ha, come on. We're friends, you let us go, right? Boss. His only response was a smirk that was positively dripping with malice. Haha boss. A few very enjoyable minutes later, Naruto was happily brushing his hands together at a job well done. Looking skywards at the sight of the 3 genin dangling from a rope tied far up a tall tree, he smiled contentedly, glad he hadn't done any real damage. Mogi and Yuden were just dazed, not having put up much of a fight. Although to be fair, Mogi had tried to rub up against the clone that had been holding her, trying to seduce me. She really does take this most beautiful kunoichi thing too far, he suppressed a shudder. Yuden had just let himself get knocked out, unable to break Naruto's hold. Konohamaru on the other hand, well conscious, had clearly been roughed up. He hadn't wanted to be too mean to the little brat, but still, throwing him around a bit had been amazingly therapeutic. Now, that felt good. Taking a second to flash them the victory sign, he proceeded to gloat some more. Hey, don't worry too much. I left your headbands, he indicated to the black cloth still tied around their heads. I'm even going to give you a chance. It's only the first day and I've already knocked out enough red teams. I'll do you a favor and focus on hunting black teams from now. If you guys can get down from there, maybe you can find a red team and pass before it ends. The only response he got was a series of groans, so he flashed them a quick salute and headed off. While it was nice to throw Konohamaru's words back in his face and even better to get back at him, he did still like the brat. He didn't want to destroy their chances of advancement. Well, I'll stay true to my word, I'll hunt down any black teams I can find, he sighed, making another concession. I guess if I find a red team I could aim to just weaken them. That'd give Konohamaru a chance to catch them. Geez, I really am too nice. Most likely, I am the weakest at this, Gaara realized as he dashed across a river towards where he had heard the distant sounds of battle. I don't have any specific tracking skill nor much experience tracking at all. I don't move as fast as Naruto or B. That's without even considering Naruto's Kage Bunshin. The first day of the test was drawing to a close and he'd only managed to gather the bandanas of 2 red teams and 5 black teams. With his skills he had no problem subduing a team when he did catch up to them, it was simply a matter of locating them in the first plaque. Luckily, he thought as he watched the rising of the full moon over the night sky, I do have one advantage over even Naruto and B. Gaara had spent almost his entire life getting as little sleep as possible, fearing the erosion of his psyche. Even with Shukaku removed, he still didn't feel any need to sleep often. Even just getting used to the idea of being able to sleep had taken him a lot of adjustment. The Gaara a week or a month without sleep was no problem at all, he would go days without sleep without even realizing it. The other genin will no doubt wish to push themselves as far as possible on the first day. However, the constant movement and pressure from battle will slow their bodies and sap their stamina, they will need to stop for the night. Leaping from the river into the forest, he followed it up a steep hill, before finally arriving at the approximate area he'd picked up the sounds of battle from earlier. Swiftly moving from tree to tree, he finally saw his goal. It appeared his suspicions were correct. A team of older genin. They appeared to be around his age, perhaps slightly older, 2 men and 1 woman. He couldn't identify the village of any from sight alone. From the looks of things, they'd fought and driven another team off earlier. They had a small shelter nestled against a rock formation, and one of them seemed to have some pretty painful injuries, at least judging by the way the kunoichi kept fussing over him anytime he moved. Instinctively gathering, stopping and spiking his chakra for a moment to break any possible illusions, he verified the sight in front of him. They appeared to be putting away their meal and arguing over a sleeping rotation. Well, they don't have to worry about that, he smiled as he let his sands silently encircle their position. They were the first of many participants that night to discover the advantages of a man conditioned not to need sleep. The light sun was a little past the horizon on the second day of the exams when Gaara arrived at the tower. He had expected to arrive first, seeing as both Naruto and B would have no reason to work through the night. Still, it had taken him longer than he'd expected to arrive. While there didn't seem to be any truly dangerous beasts in this ground like there had been in the so-called Forest of Death, the terrain was incredibly difficult to navigate. Even an experienced shinobi like him was slowed down considerably navigating crags, canyons, rivers and the various smatterings of woodland. He guessed it was about 9 AM and with nothing better to do settled down against the entrance to wait for his team. It took a few more hours for the rest of the team to arrive, Naruto's clone arriving second followed by B and the real Naruto a distant last, only arriving shortly before midday. Sorry guys, I got lost somehow, he explained sheepishly when he finally arrived. Anyway, Naruto continued, clearly attempting to change how'd we all do. I did pretty damn well I think. He tipped out 6 red scrolls and threw down a large pile of bandanas. Not bad, Gaara commented, removing his collection, adding a further 5 scrolls and a number of bandanas to the pile. Ha! I've got you both beat. Naruto's clone piped up happily, counting out 10 scrolls and a huge clump of bandanas. Looks like there was good pickings where I was. He was quickly dismissed before he could gloat more, Naruto swaying slightly at the feedback from a clone active for an entire day. Not bad at all, B commented, throwing another 6 scrolls onto the pile and dumping his collection of bandanas to complete the small mound. We got almost everyone, we might be the only team to pass. As a team or as individuals we kick arse. Hell yeah. Naruto readily agreed to that. Let's go turn these in. Already scooping both the piles up. And so a few minutes later, they passed through the entrance corridors and into what appeared to be the main foyer of the tower, a large bare room with a cold gray floor, decorated with symbols of the various ninja hand signs. Quickly seeing they weren't alone, the far end of the room containing a large contingent of ninja talking, playing cards, meditating or otherwise killing time. What's going on? Gaara was the first to notice. I believe those are the Jonin sensei, waiting for their teams. Ah, there's Mei-sama, he pointed out, the stunning brunette slowly making her way over to them. Naruto, never one to wait on ceremony, instantly called out to her and ran over, getting the attention of the entire Jonin assembly. What took you 3 so long? I was expecting to be out of here by lunch yesterday. I certainly wasn't expecting to have to stay the night. Mei fumed, she'd been having so much fun going on diplomatic exchanges to various Konoha Izakaya with the Hokage. Having to bum around in a cold tower waiting for her team to finally pass was not her idea of a good vacation. We decided to go the extra mile, Gaara answered simply before Naruto had a chance to get mad at her. Yeah? Check this out, the man in question yelled, opening his arms and dumping the piles of bandanas and scrolls onto the floor, sending them clattering around the room. Looking around now, with the full attention of the various Jonin sensei, he could see looks of shock and irritation among them all. It was clear to everyone involved that most of their teams wouldn't be arriving. Mei studied the pile curiously before giving a short laugh. Well, I certainly didn't expect that. I imagine that will make things simpler when it comes time for the finals. In that case I say well done. Now. Let's get out of here, maybe we can track down Hokage-sama. That thought brought a smile to her face, her so-called team had done well, it was a nice sunny day, and she had an excuse to celebrate. Perfect. He grinned and struck up conversation with the impatient Mizukage as she walked away, attempting to get her to rap with him. Gaara simply nodded and followed. Naruto flashed victory signs to the rest of the Jonin sensei and whooped "Yeah. Stage 2 clear." Before pumping his fists and following to join in the conversation. Only 2 more teams made it to the tower before nightfall on day 2, aside from having a group of S-class ninja out making the test harder for them, the distance truly was a long way for a standard genin to travel in such a short time. A little before midnight, however, the doors banged open one last time, and 3 straggling genin stumbled in, coated in bruises and torn clothes, obviously near the end of their reserves, with only 2 having managed to keep their headbands. Sensei Hanabi called out upon seeing the man quickly shunshin over to them. We made it. Having no energy for further conversation, she opted to simply thrust their scroll out and nod her way through her sensei's proud congratulations to the team. Task complete and absolutely exhausted, Hanabi was considering just lying on the floor and going to sleep when a soft voice drew her attention. Congratulations, Hanabi-chan. You've done well. Surprised, she turned to see Hinata smiling proudly at her before being collected into her arms, instinctively snuggling into the warm embrace. Come on, let's get you out of here. The 3rd day came and went with only a small handful more teams passing. The attitude among the remaining Jonin dropped precariously low, the idea that their teams had probably been eliminated by a group of ninja who had no place even taking the test was not a happy one for many of them. With only a little over an hour before the end of the exam, Ibisu, who had all but given up hope, was beside himself with joy when he saw the doors open up one last time and his team stumble in. Mogi seemed to be fading in and out of consciousness, just barely fending off sleep. Yuden was stopped so low his hands were almost trailing along the ground, and Konohamaru appeared to be trying to pull together the energy required to speak. They were all covered in small cuts and bruises, but miraculously it appeared that all 3 had retained their headbands. We didn't sleep 3 days, Konohamaru explained as he fished around in his pockets, finally producing a scroll, but we finally found someone. We did it. And so, task complete, he fell straight over and was unconscious before he hit the ground. Ibisu picked him up and supported Mogi and Yuden to stop the same happening to them. They'd passed. They might have only just barely made it, but they'd passed. He was practically glowing with pride as he carried them out. Finally done, Sakura stumbled out of the med bay, slumped against the nearest wall, and promptly started to slide towards the ground. The medical squad had been on standby for the second test, they'd expected some combat, they hadn't expected almost every single team to be hunted down and thrown around. Most of them hadn't needed all that much medical attention, Naruto and his team had been rather gentle with them, but still, their requirements had been to track down any genin anytime the trackers showed their headband being removed. She'd spent the last 3 days hunting through the forest, locating and retrieving genin to drag back to the med bay and be given medical treatment. She'd treated more than 200 cases, she'd barely had a moment's rest. "Naruto, I kill you." She was asleep without even finishing the thought. End chapter 2. Amik. Looks like the logistics of the third test won't be so difficult after all, Shizune happily piped up. She felt a bit guilty leaving her workload to Sakura after she was pulled off the medical squad to help with the planning for the final test. Still, no one she'd seen had been in any serious danger, and scouring the forest all night for wayward genin wasn't her dream job. Tsunade grunted acknowledgement. Now the biggest problem is how to deal with Naruto and that team of his. "I'm sure Naruto will be careful not to overdo it," Shizune answered loyally, trying to convince herself as much as anyone else. "Well, we can have a chat with him and tell him to be careful." Shikamaru stood from where he was slouched against the wall. He probably won't use the Nine Tails chakra, so why don't we just ban Sage Mode? Tsunade cocked an eyebrow, surprised. "You want me to make a rule that specifically punishes him?" The suggestion seemed odd, especially from one of his friends. "The brat annoys me, sure, but that's a bit much. Naruto worked hard for that power. We can't just ban it." Shizune couldn't even wrap her head around that idea. "It'll keep things under control," Shikamaru explained in his typical monotone. "We can just say it's a matter of keeping things fair for all the competitors." "Keeping things fair?" Tsunade scoffed at that. "It's a ninja battle. Why should it be fair? If you're stronger, you're stronger." She banged her hand on the table to emphasize that point, thankfully keeping enough presence of mind not to break the whole thing. "It'd look ridiculous to the other nations anyway," Tsunade rationalized. "Everyone'd be wondering if we'd ban bloodline limits or summons next. It's hard to say Sage Mode is more unfair than the Sharingan." Everyone nodded at that, the Sharingan especially. That thing seemed to just develop new powers whenever the user needed them. She'd originally thought it simply copied techniques. Upon taking up residence as Hokage and having access to sealed information, she'd been surprised to find it also turned back time, shot out an unstoppable fire, and summoned a giant skeleton. If she'd had any doubts, the first-hand demonstration she'd received from Madara had eliminated them. Still, considering it's a ninja from our village we're talking about, I doubt there'd be that many problems. "Surely you're free to put whatever limits you want on your own ninjas," Shikamaru countered with a shrug. "Still, it's Naruto." Shizune liked the boy, but even she could see how what would happen. He's impulsive. Even if you ban it, he'd probably use it, accidentally, just on instinct. That'd be terrible. She could just see that happening. The poor boy would be devastated being disqualified, especially if it was from a rule that had been made up to affect no one but him, for no purpose except to make his life harder. I can definitely see that. Tsunade agreed. Even if his on-the-fly plans were often brilliant, there was no denying he fought with his heart more than his mind. Getting disqualified in such a ridiculously unfair manner, well, knowing him, he probably wouldn't hold a grudge or anything. Still. "So?" Shikamaru countered again, a little annoyed at having to argue 2 against 1. Did they not see where he was going with this? If Naruto gets disqualified, that makes it easier, doesn't it? No worries about him overdoing things. Seeing the shocked look on their faces, he realized he would need to fully explain this. "It's cold, sure, but I mean, it's not like he needs to win the tournament or even do anything in the tournament, right? I don't think there's anyone that thinks Naruto shouldn't be a chunin at the very least, but it's not like that's decided from winning the tournament." Tsunade pondered that. "That's true, even if he gets disqualified the selection committee would still make him a chunin." She laughed a little. "It's not like they'd sit down and say, oh well, he's an experienced ninja, a sage and probably the most powerful person in the world, but he got disqualified so we better not pass him." The fact that as the Hokage she'd be part of that decision-making process, and anyone who even thought such a comment would drastically shorten their lifespan went unsaid. Yup, she thought, there was simply no way that would happen. It did make sense, the idea that even if Naruto was somehow disqualified in an incredibly biased manner, he'd still pass the test and ultimately everyone would be happy. "It's not a bad plan, Shikamaru, but no, I don't feel comfortable doing that to him. Making up a rule just to punish one person looks ridiculous. Plus we do want him to show off in the exam, to show the strength of Konoha's ninja." That was true even if that damn Mizukage was trying to take all the credit for the team. She grumbled internally a bit at that. Naruto certainly had audacity. "Let's just make plans around sealing and earth techniques to reinforce the structure and the arena itself." "Okay. That settled." Thinking of the Mizukage had reminded her now. "I just remembered I have another diplomatic commitment with Kiri tonight. So I'll leave the planning to you two." So saying she grabbed her hat and leapt out the window towards the Izakayame, had mentioned she was taking her team tonight. Wow. Tsunade-sama. What if Naruto beats everyone in chunin exam? End here and thanks for watching my video till the end.